Chapter 89. This year's border town was very different from the previous years. In previous years, after the end of the months of the demons, they had to stay in the slums of Longsong Stronghold for another month, waiting for the snow to completely melt before they could embark on their journey home. But when they returned to the town, they saw that it was mostly a mess. The houses that had not been taken care of for several months were dilapidated, some of the less sturdy wooden houses had long been crushed by the heavy snow, and some of the townspeople were even hiding from the demonic beasts. Cabinets and tables were bitten to pieces, and they even dragged rags of grass to fill the corners, apparently using this place as a shelter from the wind and snow as their own nest. They often spent a week repairing the houses and replacing the soaked and moldy furniture. As for the lingering smell of decay, the residents here were already used to it. But this year, Border Town could be said to be brand new. The snow was quickly swept away, and the prince's colorful paper flags were hung in front of the houses. Looking from afar, the monotonous and dilapidated town had become a riot of colors, all kinds of flags mixed together, like a sea of flowers. Everyone rushed to spread the news that on the first day after the end of the months of the demons, His Highness would hold a grand celebration ball in the square. Anyone could go. Not only did they not need to pay money, but they also heard that there would be free food. What was a ball? It was a social occasion that only the upper nobles could attend. Everyone had only heard about it from the well-informed merchants in the big cities, but even they could not participate in it. According to the merchants, it was not an event that could be invited just because you had money. His Highness actually allowed everyone to attend? Your Highness, isn't it not good for you to do this? Chief Knight dissuaded, there is neither a band nor a lead dancer here, who will control the rhythm of the ball. Besides, in such a remote place, even the nobles might not necessarily know how to dance. Your subjects will only ruin everything. Carter had only been to one ball in King's City, which was held by a marquis to celebrate his daughter's birthday. Elegant string music and impassioned drum beats intertwined. The ladies danced to the melodious music, while the men showed their fast and powerful dance steps after the drum beats sounded. They either spun or kicked, combining their movements with the drum beats. During the break, the attendants shuttled through the crowd with drinks and snacks. The men were all looking for the women they liked, and when the last piece of music was played, they summoned their courage and went up to invite her. After the ball was over, the winner would have a romantic night. Carter sighed. Although he didn't manage to date the girl he liked when he was young, the elegant and romantic atmosphere still made him reminisce. Replacing the distinguished nobles with this bunch of villagers who deal with rocks and beasts every day. God, he could not imagine such a scene. Lead dancer? Yes. Roland ordered the militia to remove all the stone sculptures and gallows in the square. Iron Axe and the militia are the ones. That Sand Nation. Carter was stunned. As the captain of the Flintlock team, Iron Axe's performance during the months of the demons had finally won the recognition of the chief knight, and he no longer mentioned the title of alien. But in the end, he was still a Majin. How could he know the etiquette of the mainland kingdom? Roland smiled mysteriously, because I'm not going to hold a normal ball, you'll know when the time comes. There wasn't much preparation work to be done. The main thing was to remove the obstacles in the square and build a pile of firewood in the center. Next to the pile of firewood was a brick table for barbecuing. That's right, this was the celebratory ball that Roland had thought of, a combination of a bonfire party and a barbecue in the wild. How to increase the people's sense of identity with their place of residence had always been a problem that the prince had seriously considered. Nationalism and nationalism were too profound for these uneducated villagers who had worked for the Lord all their lives. Only their wealth and loved ones were worth caring about. The more backward a civilization was, the more short-sighted it would be. This was the law of civilization development. Civilization will eventually become as big as its thoughts. Roland deeply believed in this. But this didn't mean that spiritual construction could be ignored. The victory celebration was one of the methods he had figured out. In fact, it was difficult to understand why the world didn't have any celebration after the months of the demons. The once-a-year invasion of the demonic beasts was like a natural disaster. Defeating such evil spirits was naturally worthy of being written in a book. So he decided to name the first day after the end of the months of the demons as Victory Day. All the territories that belonged to him would not only have a public holiday, but also hold a variety of celebration activities. As long as it lasted for 3 or 4 years, it would become a tradition that would be passed down in the territory. And the people would gradually feel that they were different from the people under the rule of other lords. Before noon, the square was crowded with people. The militia members formed a circle, blocking everyone outside the pile of firewood. It seemed that the free food was quite attractive, at least half of the townspeople had come, Roland thought. The only drawback was that the square was a little small, except for the open space around the pile of firewood. More than 1,000 people were almost shoulder to shoulder. It was difficult to have a space to move. He also saw that some children had climbed onto the nearest roof and were looking at the middle of the square. It was the first celebration, it was inevitable that there would be some shortcomings. Roland estimated that it was almost time, so he went on stage to give a speech. This was the second time he gave a public speech in the square, so he was much calmer than the last time. My people, good noon. I am the 4th Prince of Greycastle Kingdom, Roland Wimbledon. He still chose the same opening as last time, but this time the effect was completely different. The voice had not yet fallen, the crowd had already burst into enthusiastic cheers. Long live His Royal Highness! Long live His Royal Highness! Roland suddenly felt his chest heat up. This time he did not arrange anyone to support him. Seeing the spontaneous cheers of the militia and the crowd, a sense of achievement and satisfaction filled his heart. When the cheers subsided, he pressed down his hand. The months of the demons is over. Under the heroic efforts of the militia, the demonic beasts have never been able to cross the wall. Border Town defeated the terrible enemy with a very small price, which proves that as long as everyone is united, even if we do not rely on the charity of Longsong Stronghold, we can still stand firm here. They wanted to threaten the town with food, they wanted to force us to surrender with hunger and cold, but today's victory told them that all of this is futile. That's right, I never want to go back to that place. Following His Royal Highness, there will not be a day of hunger in winter. Finally, we don't have to be blackmailed by them. His Royal Highness is merciful. Taking advantage of the rising mood of the crowd, Roland continued to say loudly, let us celebrate this glorious victory, this is a day worth remembering. I declare, from now on, the first day after the end of the months of the demons will be called Victory Day. The celebration party is precisely for this. My people, enjoy this day to the fullest. Now, the party begins. Chapter 90. 6 marinated whole cows were carted to the bonfire. If not for the militia escorting them, Roland suspected that when the cart passed through the crowd, the whole cows would have been divided up by the enthusiastic crowd. This was all the stock in the castle basement. Thinking that he would not have any steak to eat until the next merchant ship arrived, Roland felt like crying. In order to hold this celebration, he had taken out everything he had. The royal chef from King's City was only responsible for smearing the sauce and supervising the fire. The barbecue task was handed over to the 6 strong militia members. An iron pole was inserted into the cow's body through its mouth and placed on a brick platform next to the fire. The fire was burning so fiercely that people could feel the heat wave from 2 or 3 meters away. Soon, the whole cow's skin made a sizzling sound, and the fat came out of its pores, exuding a tempting fragrance. Of course, they couldn't let everyone wait while they were barbecuing, so under Roland's signal, Iron Axe led a group of militia members onto the stage. Those gorgeous and complex court dances were not suitable for such an occasion. Without a long period of training, they might not even be able to remember the essentials of the movements, let alone show a beautiful dance. To ensure that the dance was easy to understand and at the same time, the Sand Nation's dance was obviously more in line with the taste of the common people. Iron Axe and the militia members put their hands on their hips, one of their hands passing through the arm of their companion on the right, forming 2 rings around the fire. With the accompaniment, that is, several high and low horns sounded, they began to move in a clockwise direction. With each step they took, the other foot would kick forward, while shouting, "Ha hey! Is this what you call a lead dance?" Carter's eyes widened. Is this also considered a dance? Of course it is, and it's simple and easy to remember. Last night, the militia only practiced for a quarter of an hour before they mastered the steps. Roland laughed. Do you want to try it? Carter shook his head and refused. He felt as if something in his heart had broken. Farewell, that beautiful girl, farewell, those slightly sad memories of youth. The other militia members clapped their hands and followed the steps of the dancers. Every time they took a turn, there would be a round of applause. The strong sense of rhythm inspired the crowd, and they all reached out their hands to do the same. As the applause became faster and faster, Iron Axe and his teammates spun faster and faster, and the human ring began to show signs of disconnection. Not long after, a member of the team accidentally fell down, and then a group of people fell down with him, and the rotation came to an abrupt end. The crowd was stunned, but the applause of the militia did not stop at all. Instead, it became like a storm. Iron Axe helped the fallen man up and shouted to the crowd, "Do you understand? Who wants to give it a try?" If they fell, it would be the end of this round. Everyone who joins the dance will get a piece of delicious honey-roasted meat. The longer you stay, the more meat you'll get. If it was an invitation from a noble or a big family, the townspeople might not necessarily participate. Subconsciously, they were always high and mighty and regarded the civilians as worthless. It was common for them to go back on their word. However, when they saw the militia members, who were their familiar neighbors, waving at them, they couldn't hold back anymore. With the first one, there was soon a second, then a third. A new round of dancing began again, but this time, most of the dancers were replaced by the crowd. Although the movements were simple, everyone enjoyed it. With the honey-roasted meat as a reward, the participants gave their best performance. This was exactly what Roland wanted to see. In addition to the roasted meat, there was also bread, fish cakes, and ale, which would be distributed after the beef was distributed. The celebration would last until the evening, but Roland would not stay here all the time. He arranged for Carter to be responsible for the security of the scene. The assistant minister came to give a closing speech, and then left. He still had a private celebration party to attend, which was held in the castle's back garden. When the evening fell, the backyard was still brightly lit. Like in the center of the square, there was also a bonfire. The only difference was that the chicken used for barbecue was all cut into pieces. The seasoning and oil were also made by themselves, completely imitating the way of barbecue in the wild. This novel way of self-help made the witches fall in love with it. Of course, in Roland's eyes, it was also a rare spectacle. For example, Anna put the seasoning on the chicken and then directly wrapped it in green fire, instantly cooking a piece of delicious chicken. Nightingale showed her incredible knife skills. The knife in her hand appeared and disappeared, flying up and down around the chicken, peeling it, and then the bones fell off. Of course, there was also wine. These bottled wine from Willow Town was obviously more suitable for women's tastes than ale. Lightning alone drank half a bottle. Although Roland wanted to say that minors were not allowed to drink, she was holding the bottle and floating in the air, so it was difficult to dissuade her, so he gave up. Halfway through the barbecue, Roland felt slightly drunk. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the group of laughing girls in front of him, and suddenly felt very gratified. This was the life a prince should have, he thought, and also for the witches. With their extraordinary ability and appearance, they should not be the target of hunting. If it was in the era before his transmigration, he was afraid that wherever they went, they would be the focus of attention. And now, all he could do was to let them live a normal life in this small place. At this moment, lightning floated down and sat directly on Roland's lap. Before he could react, she suddenly kissed him on the cheek. Although this action was done very quickly, it was still caught by the witches. She flew away with a smile, and saw Anna, Nightingale and Vendi looking at her with a surprised face. She waved her hand and explained, according to the rules of the fjords, during the celebration of victory, a woman can take the initiative to kiss the leader. Every time, my father will let me kiss him. Is there no such custom in Grey Castle? Of course not. Roland instantly sobered up from his drunkenness. Cough cough, Lightning, you're drunk, hurry up and go back to sleep. How is that possible? Lightning protested. When I was sailing, I often drank with everyone, and I never lost. Roland had no choice but to ask the witches for help. He looked at Vendi, who nodded and rolled up a downward airflow, blowing Lightning down. When she was about to land, Vendi took 2 steps forward and hugged the girl, ignoring her incessant shouting in her arms, and went straight to the castle. Don't pay attention to that girl, she just drank too much. You continue to eat, there will be dessert later. Roland suddenly felt the atmosphere a little awkward, especially the way Anna looked at him. It made him feel a chill rising from the soles of his feet. Only Nana was completely unaffected. She was still concentrating on roasting the chicken wings in her hands, as if nothing had happened. When the bonfire gradually extinguished, Roland let Nightingale escort Nana home, while he went to the well and washed his face with cold water, preparing to return to his room to sleep. Roland didn't care about this little episode. In his opinion, Lightning was still a minor child. But when he walked to the bedroom door on the 3rd floor, the prince's heart fiercely jumped. Chapter 91. Moonlight shone through the window in the corridor, illuminating half of the woman's face. Her eyes reflected a faint blue light, like stars in the dark. Anna's body leaned against the door. Most of her body was in the shadow, but her outline was still faintly visible. Good nutrition made her not as thin as she was at first. As a woman who had just reached adulthood, her figure was just right, containing the unique youthful charm of her age. Roland pretended to be calm and slowly walked forward. Anna also saw him, stood up straight, and looked him in the eyes. It was just an accident, I didn't know she would, he said. I understand. She was still young, I didn't care at all, I also understand. Contrary to what Roland had expected, Anna did not seem to be throwing a tantrum. There was not a trace of displeasure on her face. Instead, she looked very serious. Her lake blue eyes did not have the slightest ripple. Roland realized that she was still a straightforward woman. She did not like to pretend, and she did not need to pretend. Sure enough, she took the initiative to say, I can't be like Lightning, who dared to do such bold behavior in front of everyone, so I can only wait for you here. After saying this, her cheeks were obviously a little red, but even so, she did not flinch. Her eyes were still looking straight at Roland, and her expression could be said to be extremely serious. Roland's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to say something, but at this moment, all words seemed redundant. She might mind Lightning's actions, but being wronged or complaining was not her way of doing things. She would only express her own demands straightforwardly. An honest and hard-working child should not be rejected, he thought. Bending down, Roland put his cheek close to Anna. Her breath blew slightly, like a spring breeze that plucked at his heartstrings. The slightly nervous breathing was clearly heard in the silent corridor, and then, a soft lips gently pressed on Roland's cheek. Good night, Your Highness, Anna whispered. Vendi leaned against the headboard and flipped through the book in her hand. For her, this was a rare leisure time, a life she had never dared to dream of when she was in the Witch Cooperation Association. It hadn't been long since she came to Border Town, but she had already developed the habit of washing her body before going to bed, putting on a silk nightgown, not fastening it at the waist nor buttoning it. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, with a soft pillow behind her back, she would read the books she had borrowed from His Royal Highness. Today, it took a lot of time to settle down Lightning, so she didn't plan to go back to the back garden. Instead, she went straight to bed after washing up. This was a history book about the origins of the church. Although she grew up in a convent, she did not know much about it. The nun repeatedly told them to listen to God, but she never mentioned God's name. This puzzled her when she was young. Everyone had a name, but why didn't the noblest God have one? What was recorded in the book was basically the same as the rumors she had heard later. In the beginning, there were 3 major churches on the continent, each of them considered the other as heretics, believing in the evil god. This war of faith lasted for nearly 100 years, and finally the current church won, claiming that the evil god had been destroyed. From now on, God only had one name, which was the word God itself. The rest of the book described the glory and immortality of the church, including the establishment of the old holy city and the new holy city, as well as the victory against the evil witches. This made Vendi feel very strange. She had borrowed The History of Grey Castle and A Brief History of the Continent from His Royal Highness Roland. The first book recorded the establishment, development, and major events of the kingdom in almost every detail. For example, the names of the kings, their marriages, and the whereabouts of their children. The family branches recorded in the book were like a detailed genealogy. A Brief History of the Continent focused on the evolution of the four kingdoms, the alternation of power and political struggles, but the lives of the rulers of each kingdom were still important. But in the history of the church, there was no mention of the name of any pope, or in other words, just like God, the word pope directly replaced the names of the previous leaders. Reading the whole book, it seemed as if he alone had gone through hundreds of years of history. This was simply not in line with common sense. Rather than a record, it was better to say that it was deliberately diluted. At this moment, Nightingale suddenly appeared in the room. Vendi put down the book and looked at the other with great interest. It's so late, but you actually have time to come here? The latter rubbed her neck, walked to the bed and sat down. I just sent Nana home, where's Lightning? She fell asleep as soon as she laid on the bed, and her mouth kept muttering Daddy, Daddy. Vendi shrugged. She usually looks bold, but she's still a child. In your eyes, everyone is a child. Nightingale snatched the book from her hands. His Royal Highness said that you should try not to read at night, especially sitting on the bed. If the light is not enough it will harm your eyesight. Yes, yes, His Royal Highness said. The two chatted for a while, from Silver City to the impassable mountain range, from hearing that a witch had been killed in Border Town to joining hands with the prince to fight against the months of demons. Nightingale spoke a word or two, and from time to time Vendi also spoke a few words. This was the tacit understanding that the two had formed after being inseparable for the past 5 years. Time passed slowly, until the candle was about to go out. Vendi covered her mouth and laughed. What, after seeing Lightning's actions, you can't sleep? What are you talking about? What else could it be? Vendi smiled and shook her head. Veronica, we are witches, you should know that. Nightingale was silent, and after a long time, she softly responded, yes. This was fate, the fate that all witches could not escape. Vendi stopped smiling and sighed. Roland Wimbledon is the kingdom's 4th prince, and what we have to do is to help him ascend the throne, to become the king of Grey Castle. He will govern the country well, and give us a place to live. But, he is still a king. When the time is right, he will marry the daughter of a duke, or the princess of another kingdom, and then give birth to children. Either one, or many, or a boy, or a girl. The boys will inherit the country, and the girls will marry other prominent nobles. At this point, Vendi paused for a moment, and then said the words that Nightingale, or rather, all witches did not want to hear. Veronica, we are witches, and witches are unable to bear children. Even if you think optimistically, after His Royal Highness has been in power for 100 years, the sisters will finally be no different from ordinary people, and can walk freely in every land of the kingdom. Occasionally, there will be outstanding witches who enter the upper class, and are conferred as nobles, but the fact that witches are unable to bear children is still unchangeable. They will not have descendants to continue the glory of their family, and similarly, those aristocratic families will not consider marrying a witch. God gives us something, but at the same time, takes away something from us. This is fate. She whispered, may you be merciful. I understand, she whispered. After sending Nightingale away, Vendi's heart was also not very good, but she believed that the other would be able to come out. After all, they had overcome so many difficulties, and would not easily fall on this hurdle. Chapter 92. In this way, our task is over, right? In the square, Cat's Claw cleaned up the remains of the bonfire and said regretfully, I really don't want to go back to work in the mine. To be honest, I miss the months of the demons. Yes, I also don't want to deal with those stones, Jop answered. The most important thing is that the pay difference is too big. Where else would there be a job like the artillery team, where there is meat to eat every day and a monthly salary of 15 silver royals? What nonsense are you talking about? Van, who was holding a torch to illuminate the surroundings, snapped. This time His Royal Highness gave out a lot of food, so no one starved to death during the months of the demons. Think about the last 2 years, half of the people in the old district didn't survive the winter. Do you still miss it? Besides, the team will not be disbanded. His Royal Highness recruited us into the artillery team and burned so much gunpowder, just to listen to the sound. But the demonic beasts are gone. Why does His Royal Highness still need the artillery team? Rodney asked, leaning on his broom. The artillery team was not prepared for demonic beasts. Vanner thought for a moment, but in the end, he didn't say it. Anyway, we'll know the answer tomorrow. He yawned and waved his hand impatiently. Hurry up and clean up this place. I want to go back and sleep early. The next morning, the assembly call resounded throughout the camp, confirming Vanner's statement. After everyone had gathered, Iron Axe stood in front of the team and said loudly, "You have completed the first stage of the task, to protect Border Town from the demonic beasts. After 3 months and 6 days of fighting, you have won the approval of His Royal Highness. Next, the militia will be reorganized into His Royal Highness regular army. If you don't want to continue fighting, you can stand up now." His Royal Highness said that if you leave the militia, you will be given full pay, and an additional 25 silver royals as. He thought about His Royal Highness' words, retirement pay. Among the 300 people, no one moved, only Cat's Claw raised his hand and said, "Report." This was also one of the strange rules set by His Royal Highness during the training. The team members were not allowed to whisper in private, and when there was something to ask, they had to first shout, "Report." Iron Axe nodded, "Speak. What does the regular army mean? Does it mean that we are conferred the title of knight?" Van could not help but laugh, but he quickly returned to a serious face. Knight? They were considered nobles. Not only did they have properties and squires, but they were also given land. Asking such a question was a disgrace to the artillery team. No, Iron Axe explained patiently. Apparently, he had also asked His Highness about this. The regular army is an army that specializes in fighting. They fight only to protect His Highness and protect His Highness' territory. In other words, when a worker is digging in a mine, you are training. When a farmer is harvesting wheat, you are training. When a merchant is selling his goods, you are still training. All the training is for the sake of victory in future battles, just as you did during the months of the demons. Then how is it different from the militia? Cat's Claw asked again. More frequent training, stricter regulations, and more generous rewards. Report. This time it was Rodney. After Iron Axe nodded, he eagerly asked, "What's the better reward?" Vanner sighed. Why were all the guys in his group so impetuous? Although he also wanted to know the answer to this question. The regular army will implement the officer system. Those who complete combat tasks according to the designated plan or have outstanding performance can be promoted to an officer. Iron Axe said loudly, "For example, standing in my position." Is this what His Highness said? Vanner thought, if it was really implemented, wouldn't it encourage everyone to go against their superiors? He quietly looked around, but the crowd seemed not to realize this problem and still listened with relish. Officers can get a higher salary, and their own land. The last sentence made the team burst into cheers. Vanner was no exception. He even wondered if he had heard wrong. If they could get their own land, what was the difference between them and the knight? But remember, once you choose to become a regular army, you will have to abide by a completely different system from the militia. For example, failure to complete a task, desertion, rebellion, and other violations of discipline will be severely punished. This is not a matter of eating an egg. The punishment includes labor, imprisonment, and even hanging. And the position and rewards obtained will also be taken back. Iron Axe paused. It's not too late to quit now. The crowd was silent. Iron Axe was silent for dozens of breaths, but still no one moved. He could not help but grin and said, "Very good, then from today on, you are a regular army under the direct command of His Highness Roland Wimbledon." Vanner himself felt that it was incredible. If he had heard those terrible punishments 3 months ago, he would have already run away. What was the use of promotion, what was the use of land? It was better to save his own life. But now, he almost did not hesitate to choose to stay here. Compared with returning to the North Slope mine and strolling around in the old district, Vanner felt that he was more suitable here. Good observation. What's your name? Mr. Vanner, work hard. Thinking of His Highness' encouragement, he once again confirmed his idea that he belonged to the militia. In the future, he would also be a member of the regular army and continue to fight for His Highness. Iron Axe soon announced the first training of the day, field training. At first, Vanner did not think it was a big deal. Running training was rarely interrupted, even during the months of demons. After breakfast, depending on the weather, they had to run 2 laps around the town, unless it snowed heavily. According to His Highness, this was good for exercise, so that when defending the city wall, their hands and feet would not be stiff, and they would not be able to thrust their spears. But when the team ran out of Border Town, he immediately felt the difference between the two. At this time, the snow in the wild was far from melting. It had been snowing on and off for 3 months, and now it was knee-deep. Rather than running, it was better to say that they were crawling in the snow. The team suddenly became sparse, and it took a lot of effort to pull out 1 foot. There was no doubt that this special training must have been thought up by His Highness. Vanner had already seen through His Highness' idea. At this time, protests were basically useless, and the only thing they could do was to persist to the end. They spent the whole morning going back and forth. When the team returned to Border Town, Vanner only felt that his 2 legs were not his own. The snow that had been poured into their boots had turned into water, and even standing under the sun, most of the people were still shivering from the cold. The huge consumption of physical strength aggravated the cold, and even Iron Axe felt somewhat unbearable. He announced that the team was disbanded, and the lunch time was delayed by half an hour, so that everyone could first change their soaked shoes and pants. To everyone's relief, the afternoon training was also cancelled. Of course, they did not know that Lightning had been following their training. This was also the little girl's daily training, precise control of magic and uniform flight. When she reported the information she had observed to Roland, the latter almost did not know whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 93. A few days after the victory celebration, Roland once again immersed himself in farming. Sitting in the office, he could hear the incessant dripping sound outside the window, as if it was raining. It was the sound of melting snow. When he was in the countryside during the new year, he liked to lie by the window and watch the long ice prism under the eaves turn into transparent water droplets, dripping little by little. Although he didn't have such leisure time at the moment, he could still write a plan while listening to the sound of the Earth's recovery. According to previous year's experience, it would take about a week for the snow to melt, but it would take at least a month for the road between Border Town and Longsong Stronghold. Roland could imagine what would happen to the muddy road after the ice and snow melted without any hardened pavement or drainage measures. If he could successfully capture Longsong Stronghold, the first thing he had to do was to build a hardened road between the 2 places for carriages to pass. However, the first thing he needed to solve was the problem of army construction. Without a reliable and powerful army, it would be impossible to defeat the Stronghold army when they were outnumbered. Transforming the militia into a regular army was only the first step. The specific establishment, regulations and discipline, as well as rewards and punishments, were a headache for him. Although he had played military chess when he was a child, he had completely forgotten about it. After much thought, Roland simply decided to make up his own plans. Anyway, he was the creator of the new army, no one would find out if the settings were unreasonable. So the first army of Border Town was quickly organized: army, division, battalion, team, and group as the overall framework, 5 people for a group, taking into account that a cannon needed at least 5 people to operate, 10 groups for a team, and 10 teams for a battalion. As for the number of divisions and armies, he decided to think about it later. In view of the overall combat level of this era, as long as there were 2 or 3 battalions, it would be enough to defeat the vast majority of opponents in the field. After the most basic framework was set, Roland breathed a long sigh of relief. The following regulations and discipline were much simpler. In addition to obeying military orders at all times, obeying officers, not deserting, not betraying, and so on, these old rules and so on, the first discipline that Roland set was to prohibit looting and harassment. The disadvantages of indulging in looting were numerous, and the bad impact on the local people would take several years to make up for. This was also the reason why he insisted on using civilians to form the army. When the nobles responded to the liege's summons, it was impossible for them not to participate in the plundering after defeating the enemy. In other words, the main reason why they were willing to follow the liege into battle was that they could plunder the enemy's wealth and territory. Of course, that included the innocent civilians in the territory. As for the mercenaries and bandits, it was needless to say. They looked fierce, but in reality, they could only fight with the wind. At the same time, robbing was a big source of income for them, so military discipline was meaningless to them. Only an army made up of commoners would not treat other commoners as lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Of course, it was not enough to rely on discipline and torture alone. As time passed, the greed in the bottom of his heart would continue to grow with each victory. Therefore, rewards must be given at the same time in order to put an end to plundering and other violations. In order to make the reward sufficiently motivating, Roland decided to give out his ultimate weapon, granting fields for military contributions. As long as they made great contributions in battle, they would be granted a piece of land. Roland had already thought about the source of the land. It was the land between Border Town and Longsong Stronghold. In an era where 90% of the land belonged to the aristocracy, this was definitely a generous prize. Once they obtained permanent property, these people would closely adhere to him, and anyone who wanted to overthrow him would encounter the fiercest resistance from those who benefited from it. The people didn't need to be driven by words or whips, but by real benefits. In other words, as long as he could always represent the fundamental interests of the people under his rule, no one could shake his ruling position. Different from the traditional fiefdom, Roland controlled the area of the granted land to be between a few acres and a dozen acres. It could be used to build their own houses, buy serfs, or hire farmers to take care of the fields, but it was impossible to establish an industry. In contrast, a knight's territory was close to 2,000 acres, an area equivalent to a small village. The income from the businesses above could provide for the knight and his attendants' combat needs, such as the purchase of weapons, armor, and horses. Such a small area of land as a reward would not arouse strong opposition from the aristocratic interest groups, but would also weaken the independence of the recipient. In Roland's view, it was like a retirement pension, which could ensure that soldiers would have a stable income after retirement. At the same time, in order to strengthen the centralization of power and avoid the situation of, the servant's servant is never my servant, the person who granted the land only had the ownership, but no autonomy. In other words, the land still followed the laws, regulations, and systems of the lord's jurisdiction. In a sense, they were more like the farmers of the later generations. Roland stretched himself as he wrote down the rules of the preliminary system one by one. Next, he could finally devote himself to the field he was good at, the development of weapons. As the speed of the production of guns increased, continuing to assign pikemen to protect the musketeers would be a waste of manpower, and the latter must have the ability to fight independently in close combat. The solution was very simple, and that was to add a bayonet to the gun. Roland didn't expect his troops to take the initiative to launch a melee attack on the enemy, he only needed to have the strength to fight when the enemy was desperate and the cannons couldn't completely destroy the enemy's courage. Bayonets weren't difficult to make. If you wanted to pursue simplicity, it was a sharp cone, and if you wanted to further increase its lethality, you could cut a blood groove on it. The key was the connection between the bayonet and the gun. The original bayonet had a thin wooden shaft wrapped around the hilt, and the wooden shaft could be inserted directly into the gun barrel. The advantage was that it was easy to make, but the disadvantage was also very obvious. In close combat, you couldn't shoot, and after stabbing someone, it was easy to fall into a predicament where you couldn't pull it out. Roland planned to produce the improved second generation of bayonets, the casing bayonet. The end of the handle had a corner, and it was connected to an iron casing. The inner diameter of the casing was slightly larger than the barrel, and it had a groove. The barrel only needed to be welded with a piece of iron bar for the groove to be inserted, and the blade could be fixed. The blade was a triangular iron, and all three sides were sharp. After stabbing into the body, it wouldn't affect pulling it out, but at the same time, it would leave a wound that was difficult to heal. The casing bayonet, after being installed, would be slightly higher than the barrel, which would affect the loading of ammunition. But compared to the folding bayonet, it was simple enough and convenient to mass produce. As long as they made a sample, they could hand it over to the blacksmith shop to make it. To make the bayonet useful in actual combat, the key was to train the soldiers how to use it. Chapter 94. The production of the artillery was also steadily advancing. The second cannon embryo had already entered the enlarging stage, while the third cannon was still in the process of accumulating materials. If he was lucky, after a month, he would have a magnificent lineup of 4 12-pound cannons. There was no doubt about the superiority of firepower, but how to turn this advantage into victory, this was a problem that Roland had been thinking about. Before he had crossed over, he was just a mechanical dog. Like most people, his understanding of war came from history, movies, and games. If it was a completely cold weapon war, he would let Carter and Iron Axe command. But this battle was not the same, no one could understand the combat style of hot weapons better than himself. That being the case, he could only combine all the knowledge he knew, and use a vision that was higher than this era to formulate every step of the plan. In order to ensure victory, Roland let Lightning go back and forth between Longsong Stronghold and Border Town every day, first to observe the road conditions, and second to accurately calculate the distance. Roland believed that victory in war was based on a lot of investigation and calculation. Whether it was the development of tactics or the deduction of the battle situation, it was inseparable from these 2 points. Using the measurements set by the last time he cast the cannon, he made several 1-meter-long iron rods and 100-meter-long hemp ropes. Then in the artillery test field west of Border Town, according to the hemp ropes and the wooden rods, he drew out a flight runway about 1 kilometer long. Lightning practiced controlling the magic consumption, repeatedly crossing the distance of 1 kilometer at a fixed speed. When she was proficient in the magic output, Roland began to measure the distance between Longsong Stronghold and Border Town. Using the sundial to get the time to go back and forth, he calculated that the distance between the two places was about 54 kilometers. Of course, this was only a straight line distance. In fact, if they traveled by land, they would have to make 2 big turns to avoid the foot of the impassable mountain range. In any case, if the Duke chose to march by land, it would take at least 3 days to reach Border Town. With Lightning as the scout, Roland would be able to clearly understand the enemy's position, as well as the actions to take. Within a range of 2 kilometers west of Border Town, he had inserted a lot of signal markers to mark the distance. As long as the enemy entered this range, the artillery team could quickly adjust the corresponding muzzle angle without the need for a firing meter. Now he began to worry, what if the enemy didn't come over? Just then, there was a knock on the door. Nightingale, who had been lying on the sofa and chewing on dried fish, suddenly disappeared. Roland coughed twice and said, "Come in." The assistant minister Barav opened the door. "Your Highness, there is a noble from Longsong Stronghold who wants to see you." "Who?" Roland did not understand for a moment. "They sent another ambassador." Barav, Roland thought for a moment. Stronghold, 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 stronghold. Barav, Roland did not understand. Roland thought for a moment before remembering that Border Town had indeed been inhabited by nobles in the stronghold. Stronghold said. Moreover, he came here at the beginning of spring. Had he not seen the iron fists of the royal family? What? What of stronghold, roar? Was Roland roared. Roland. Stronghold, cannon. Roland wanted to agree, but then he changed his mind. Let Baron wait for me in the living room. Maybe I can use him to put a little pressure on Longsong's stronghold, the prince thought. After a quarter of an hour, Roland leisurely arrived at the living room. On one side of the long table, a man with a round belly was already waiting impatiently. He walked back and forth, his face trembling with each step. Seeing that His Royal Highness had appeared, the Baron stopped and reluctantly bowed. Sit down. Roland returned to the main seat and sat down. According to his usual habits, even if it wasn't dinner time, he would let the kitchen prepare a dessert, but today he didn't even let them prepare a cup of tea. Your Highness, Baron Cornelius hadn't even sat down when he hurriedly said, "How could you let those stupid masons tear down my house?" It was a good house, the walls were made of stone bricks, and the beams and roof were made of the best quality logs. When I built it, it cost me 150 golden dragon. He stretched out his fingers and gestured. 150, Roland sneered twice in his heart. If he had just arrived in Border Town, with the prince's memory, he might have believed it. But now. Do you mean the house in the westernmost part of the town? Cornelius nodded again and again. Yes, that's it. It's the second largest house in the town after Baron Simon's house. That's a pity, it's too close to the wall, blocking the passage of my men. Roland paused for a moment, but the city hall has already made compensation. How much? Roland stretched out 2 fingers, 20 golden dragon. That's too little. Your Highness. Cornelius opened his mouth, as if he wanted to argue, but in the end, he held back. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Well, 20 golden dragon, where should I go to get this money? Get? Roland pretended to be puzzled. This money has already been paid to the owner of the house. What? Wait. I am the owner of the house. Not you, it's Blair, the captain of my second militia. Who is that? The Baron shouted loudly. Your Highness, you are mistaken. I am the owner of that house. Is that so? But I didn't see you during the winter. Roland raised his eyebrows. How can you say that house is yours? Of course I went back to Longsong's stronghold. Who would want to stay in this damned place? If I'm not careful, I will be fed to the demonic beasts. Idiot, Roland evaluated him in his heart, but he still maintained a flat tone. So you want to say that because you were afraid of the demonic beasts, you abandoned your lord and ran away, is that it? I. The Baron suddenly froze. Guards, Roland clapped his hands. 2 guards immediately came in from the outside of the living room, sandwiching Cornelius in the middle. Your Highness, what do you mean by this? It's very simple, now you have 2 choices. Roland stood up from his seat and contemptuously looked at the other side. First, you admit that you were wrong, that house doesn't belong to you, I can treat it as a farce, and now let you go. Second, during the months of the demons, you betrayed your lord, left your territory without permission, and shamefully fled to Longsong's stronghold. I will put you in prison, and then hang you for defection. Which do you choose? Cornelius's forehead was sweating profusely. He swallowed his saliva, hesitated for a while, and then said with a trembling voice, Your Highness, I made a mistake, that house isn't my house. So this is a misunderstanding. Roland shrugged and said to the guards, Send Mr. Baron out of here. When Cornelius came to the door, the prince stopped him. That's right, when you return to Longsong's stronghold by boat, help me send a message, tell those, the nobles who will have the same misunderstanding as you. If you don't intend to choose the second option, then you don't have to waste your time coming to Border Town. As you wish, Your Highness. Cornelius said with a forced smile, but the moment he turned around, Roland saw the other side gnashing his teeth. Chapter 95. Damn it. What kind of bullshit prince is he? Isn't he just a poor guy who was thrown into the wilderness? Cornelius thought fiercely, but looking at the 2 guards holding the hilt of their swords behind him, he had to temporarily swallow his anger into his stomach. Walking out of the castle gate, he saw the guards turn around and leave, so the Baron was relieved. He pulled out a wet handkerchief and wiped his forehead, fiercely spitting out a mouthful of spittle, while imagining the scene of the spittle hitting the prince's face. This wasn't enough to vent his anger, so he stamped his foot on the spittle twice, feeling a little better. So what if you blocked the demonic beasts? Do you think you can stand firm in the western region? Continue to be proud, let's see how long you can be proud. Cornelius thought, if he hadn't received reliable information, he wouldn't have come to Border Town so early. Generally speaking, the nobles would return to Border Town later than the civilians. After all, mining and hunting were not their turn. They only needed to go to the mine every once in a while to supervise the production and wait for the day of the ore delivery. In their spare time, they could also go to the hunters' homes to see if there were any suitable high-quality furs to buy. But this year, the situation had changed. Cornelius heard from the chief financial officer, Sir Reynolds, that the Duke Ryan was ready to drive the fourth prince out of the western region. This wasn't a betrayal of the Grey Castle Kingdom, but an order from the new king, Timothy Wimbledon. Roland Wimbledon is no longer the lord of Border Town. The new territory needs to be reconferred after he returns to King's City. Who was Sir Reynolds? He was the favorite of the Duke. In just a short 5 years, he climbed from a municipal official to the position of chief financial officer. If he hadn't used his relationship with his distant relatives to send him 2 good furs every year, how could he have known the thoughts of the western region's ruler? Reconferring the new territory after he returns to King's City was just a nice way of saying it. Even Cornelius knew that the eldest prince had been sent to the guillotine without saying a word. When the fourth prince returned, wouldn't he be at the mercy of the new king? There was no doubt that the western region belonged to the Duke. If it was only a unilateral order from His Majesty Timothy, then it was still open to discussion. But when the Duke was ready to go, Roland Wimbledon was no different from a stray dog. This was also the reason why Cornelius had rushed to Border Town. Firstly, he wanted to collect some furs as soon as possible, and secondly, he wanted to sell the house. First of all, his calculations were very shrewd. In previous years, the civilians had fled to Longsong's stronghold to take refuge, so naturally, they didn't have much stock. But this year, they had been staying here all the time, so how could they not receive a few good goods? Not only could he earn a small sum of money, but he could also give a gift to Lord Reynold. The second point was that Cornelius had asked Lord Reynold to arrange a seat for him in the city hall. Although it was an idle job, it was better than this damned poor place. Since he couldn't use the house anymore, he had to get rid of it as soon as possible. Who knows when the Duke will make his move? In case this group of untouchable people accidentally burned down their houses, it would be a big loss. However, he had never expected that the house would not be burned down by the untouchables. Instead, it would be torn down by the fourth prince. Thinking of this, Baron was so angry that his teeth itched. A good house. Although 150 golden dragons was somewhat exaggerated, but 30 golden dragons was still worth it. In order to get the money as soon as possible, he had retreated again and again, and even 20 golden dragons was barely acceptable, but His Highness actually treated him like this. He didn't even take out a single coin, and even threatened me with the crime of defection. Didn't he know that every year during the months of the demons, all the nobles would evacuate from this place? Wait. Cornelius slowed down his pace, and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Although he had heard before that the fourth prince had a bad character and acted without thinking, and that when he had just arrived in Border Town, he had maliciously molested Baron Simon's wife, and had been privately discussed as a joke for a long time. But today, the feeling he got was completely different. The prince didn't become angry out of humiliation or act shamelessly. The way he behaved was completely different from his bad character and his acting without thinking. The other side had been talking to him in a normal tone, so why was he so scared that he obediently gave up the ownership of the house? Could it be that if he insisted that the house was His Highness would really kill him? That's right. Cornelius couldn't help but shiver, and the sweat on his forehead shrank back. Now that he thought about it, when he was facing the prince, he had the illusion that he was talking to His Excellency the Duke. Baron shook his head vigorously, trying to put this unpleasant memory to the back of his mind. Anyway, the fourth prince wouldn't be so proud for a few days. When Duke Ryan brought Border Town back under his control, and when he escorted Roland Wimbledon to King's City, he would have to laugh at him. Maybe with these 20 golden dragon coins, I can ask His Excellency the Duke to help me seek justice. Thinking of this, he relaxed. Since he had received a few good furs, he didn't need to sell the house, he might as well just go back to Longsong's stronghold. Saying, "I will inform the nobles who will have the same misunderstanding," was simply too pretentious. When he returned to Longsong's stronghold, he had to imitate it for everyone to hear, so that everyone could see what it meant to be a bluff. Leaving the castle area, Cornelius walked down the long slope, and passed by a woman wearing a hood. Originally this wasn't strange, among the townspeople coming and going, the women were all dressed like this. If you wanted to see a beautiful young lady or a noble lady, you had to go to King's City. But when a gust of wind blew the corner of the woman's hood, Cornelius felt his heart jump, and the surrounding air seemed to solidify. My God, what kind of woman is she? She has a rare long green hair, and just by revealing her face for a moment, she can already be called a stunning beauty. Even if she was placed in Grey Castle King's City, those so-called princesses would be overshadowed. How could such a person appear in Border Town? He turned his head, wanting to catch up with her to see what was going on, but found that she was walking towards the castle area. Is this His Highness the Prince's woman? Baron hesitated, and finally chose to give up. He really didn't want to deal with the fourth prince anymore. This kind of villain should be handed over to His Excellency the Duke to deal with. It would be better for him to return to Longsong's stronghold as soon as possible. From the pier, he boarded his own single-masted clipper, the boatman pulled up the sails, and the boat quickly left the pier, heading in the direction of Longsong's stronghold. On the way back, Cornelius, who was sitting on the bow and basking in the sun, saw a spectacle. About 5 miles away from Border Town, in the snow, a large group of people appeared in his field of vision. They were all wearing the same dark brown leather armor, with long wooden spears on their backs. They were lined up in a long line, slowly walking through the snow. Although they were separated by a layer of forest, and he couldn't see the whole line, but he could tell that there were at least 100 people. This is, the farmers that the fourth prince used to fight against the demonic beasts. At the beginning of the month, when the snow hadn't melted, it could be said that there were very few people on the road. How difficult it was to walk in the snow, Cornelius didn't have to try it, but he could imagine it. But this group of people all lowered their heads and hurried on their way, as if they didn't care about the foot-deep snow under their feet. Chapter 96. Seeing the busy people around her, Leaf never thought that she would be so close to a town in the secular world one day. After entering the boundary of Border Town, the low brick bungalows, like a dusty memory, appeared in front of her one after another. Obviously, she had escaped to the impassable mountain range for less than half a year, but she felt that the scene in front of her was so strange that it was like another world. The months of demons had just passed, and the townspeople had gone through a winter of lack of food and clothing, so their complexion and health should be very bad. Leaf remembered that the Witch Cooperation Association had passed through the slums of Silver City in the winter. There were starving and frozen bodies everywhere, and the people who were still alive were like walking corpses, numb and sluggish. But here, most of the people she saw were full of energy. Some were drying dried fish in front of the house, some climbed on the roof to repair broken tiles, and most of them were strong men carrying hoes and hammers, talking and laughing with each other as they walked north of the town. In such a situation, Leaf would pull down the brim of her hat and try to avoid them as much as possible. The location of the castle was very eye-catching. It was on a high hillside in the southwest corner of the town. There were no usable plants around, so it would be very difficult to sneak in quietly. Hiding in the trunk of a tree to avoid the enemy was possible, but to let the tree climb up and send her in would make too much noise. She was not a witch who was good at hiding, so after thinking it over, Leaf felt that instead of hiding, it would be better to walk into the castle openly. If Nightingale did not lie to her, even if she walked through the front door, there would not be any problem. If Nightingale lied to her, and lied to the sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association, she was sure that she could escape from the 2 guards in front of the door. Of course, The worst-case scenario was that Nightingale completely betrayed everyone and relied on hunting witches to work for the prince. In that case, she would most likely die here. As a top combat witch, few people could escape from Nightingale's pursuit. Even someone as strong as Kara did not have the confidence to win. Leaf had already prepared for the worst. If she could not return alive, Scroll would take over the position of a mentor and lead the sisters to continue on their journey. As for where their destination was, no one knew the answer. She slowly walked up the hill and approached the castle gate. The guard quickly noticed her. He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and shouted, "This is the prince's temporary imperial residence. You shouldn't be here. Back off." He paused, then added, "If you have something urgent to report, go straight down this road to the left, and go to the town hall. There will be someone there to receive you." Leaf took a deep breath and took off her hood. Unsurprisingly, she saw the two of them show a surprised expression at the same time. Without waiting for them to recover, she bluntly said, "I'm a witch." The moment she said this, she was prepared for the guards to draw their swords. But the two guards just glanced at each other. They didn't show any of the disgust that ordinary people would show when they heard about a witch. One of them even asked with interest, "Witch, what can I do for you?" This reaction made Leaf's heart beat faster. She suppressed the excitement that was about to burst out and said as calmly as possible, "I want to see Nightingale. Or Anna and Nana can do it." In Nightingale's story, witches were frequent visitors to the castle. His Royal Highness didn't restrict their freedom, and the guards who guarded the castle turned a blind eye to them coming in and out of the castle under the instruction of Prince Roland. If what Nightingale said was true, it was impossible for the guards not to have heard of their names. The guard who asked the question patted his partner on the shoulder and said, "You stay here and look after her. I'll go inform His Royal Highness." Leaf watched him walk through the gate and quickly disappear into the garden. What would be waiting for her? Would it be a welcome from the sisters, or would it be a siege by the guards, or would it be a sharp blade from the shadows? She found herself caught in a strange contradiction. She obviously wanted to believe in Nightingale, but the closer she got to the answer, the more afraid she was of being disappointed. Could it be that Nightingale had changed her name here and was not called this at all? Could it be that Anna and Nana were made up by her? Or, time had never moved so slowly before. Every heartbeat seemed to cross 100 years. In the long time, she quietly waited for her fate. She didn't know how long it had been, or maybe it was just a short moment, but she heard Nightingale's voice. In a trance, she thought she had heard wrong. A familiar figure appeared from behind the door and rushed toward her, arriving almost at the same time as the voice. Then, she was embraced by a warm body. "Leaf, welcome home. These are my spare clothes. You can wear them first." Nightingale rummaged through the wardrobe. "And a coat, shoes. Well, a nightgown and a bath towel. Why are you in such a hurry?" Vendi shook her head with a smile. "When His Royal Highness gets up, he'll take care of her." Looking at Nightingale, who was busy, Leaf's eyes became warm again. She sniffed, bit her lips, and wiped away her tears. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she would be unable to hold back her tears. It turned out that Nightingale hadn't lied to her. A prince who was willing to be kind to witches really existed. "Do you want to take a hot bath first? You must be tired from rushing over from the camp." Nightingale put the bath towel and clothes beside Leaf. "His Royal Highness is taking a nap. When he wakes up, he'll be very happy to see you. By the way, have you found the Holy Mountain? How are the other sisters?" As soon as this question came out, Leaf's vision suddenly became blurred. She couldn't bear it any longer. She hugged Nightingale and released all the pain she had been suppressing in her heart these days. She cried until Nightingale's chest was completely soaked. Only then did Leaf gradually calm down. Then she told the story of what had happened to her sisters after the three of them left the Witch Cooperation Association. When she talked about how many of her sisters had died in the barbarian land, she felt Nightingale involuntarily clench her hand. When Leaf finished her story, Vendy's expression became extremely heavy. I didn't expect that Kara would lead the Witch Cooperation Association to a dead end. Only 7 of our 42 sisters were left. I also have an unshirkable responsibility. If I had stood firmly on Nightingale's side. It's not your fault, Nightingale said sadly. No one can predict the future. The key is what to do next. She looked at Leaf. You said that there are 6 sisters who survived. Where are they? They are waiting for my news at the entrance of the canyon. We agreed that if I couldn't return, Scroll would take them away from here, or to the southernmost corner, or across the strait, then we have to hurry and bring them back, Nightingale immediately said. I'll set off now. Vendy, I'll leave Leaf in your care. Wait, what if they don't believe you? Leaf also has to go and call Lightning. She should be practicing flying in the west of the town at the moment. You can take a few more horses with you so that the sisters can walk less. Vendy carefully said. But His Royal Highness, isn't he still sleeping? Leaf was stunned. Don't you need to ask him? Chapter 97. When Roland entered the office, he was surprised to find that the one in the room was not Nightingale, but Vendy. What happened? He poured himself a cup of warm water. Where is Nightingale? She went to meet her sisters. Really? Roland picked up the cup and was about to take a sip, when he suddenly felt something was wrong. Wait, what sisters? The sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association, they came to Border Town, Vendy replied. Didn't they go to find the Holy Mountain? He suddenly stood up. How many people came? The one who wanted to hurt Nightingale. I think she was called Kara the Snake Witch. Did she also come? No, Your Highness, they couldn't find the Holy Mountain. In the wasteland, they encountered a terrible monster, and in the end only 7 of them survived. Vendy repeated Leaf's narration, then bowed and apologized. At that time you were still taking a nap. Please forgive me for making the decision to let Nightingale and Lightning pick them up. It doesn't matter, Roland waved his hand. You know I won't blame you for this kind of thing. What kind of abilities do they have? I don't know, but I heard from Leaf that they aren't fighting witches, maybe. Vendy hesitated. They won't be of much use to you. Non-fighting witches? Roland's heart was suddenly full of expectations. Under the constraints of the God's Stone of Retaliation and the effective range of the witches, their fighting ability was actually very limited. Production was their best field. If there was a witch who specialized in plastic, he could solve the problem of rough processing technology, directly entering the era of large-scale mechanical production. If there was a witch who could generate electricity, Border Town's night would be as bright as day. Next, he would become the king. He would marry a witch, reach the peak of his life, and lead everyone to achieve the 4 modernizations. Just thinking about it made him excited. Your Highness. Don't you need them? Perhaps the long silence made Vendy worried. She asked in a low voice. No, how could that be? Roland came back to his senses and said word by word, I'll take in as many witches as you want. Just as the sun was setting, Nightingale took the rest of the sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association back to the castle, while Roland prepared a sumptuous dinner in the castle hall as a welcome feast. The witches were obviously very hungry, but since it was the first time they were eating in such an environment, everyone was very reserved. This was the first time most of them had seen the Lord, not to mention that the Lord was a prince. Fortunately, in addition to Roland himself, there were also 2 local witches, Anna and Nana, to demonstrate. With the addition of Lightning, who didn't know what awkwardness was, to liven up the atmosphere, everyone finally relaxed a little, and there were sounds of conversation at the banquet. Roland chewed on a piece of fried bread as he sized up the group of women in front of him who had completely different styles but could all be considered beautiful. This was the greatness of magic. Even if in the future there was no need for witches to participate in the development of technology, their appearance would always be a scenery that would never fade away. Car's model district had not yet been completed, so the witches could only live in the castle for the time being. There were still 4 empty rooms on the second floor. Roland thought about it and decided to change the single room into a shared room for 2 people. After all, the big beds were prepared for visiting nobles and could accommodate 2 people. After the dinner, the prince finally ushered in the long-awaited part, the ability questioning. The witches, accompanied by Nightingale, took turns to enter the office. Roland acted like an interviewer, recording each of their characteristics, and for the first time, he used the god's stone of retaliation to test the effect of their abilities. The whole process was like a job fair. When the last witch was done with her questioning, Roland's eyes widened. He let out a long breath and stretched himself. If he wasn't afraid that Nightingale might be squatting on the side and eavesdropping, he really wanted to hum a superstar. Although he didn't find a witch who specialized in shaping and generating electricity, the progress of the modernization would be delayed, but this batch of witches still brought Roland a great surprise. The most important one was the witch named Leaf. He spread the records on the table one by one and pulled out the records about her. Before adulthood, Leaf's ability was still limited to increasing the fruit of plants. After adulthood, this ability was greatly improved and derived a branch ability, plant manipulation. The first ability could be used to improve fruits and seeds, increase production, and enhance the effect of herbs. The branch ability gave her the possibility to change the characteristics of plants. According to her, by injecting magic into plants, she could make dead branches grow green leaves, she could command weeds to entangle the enemy, and she could even integrate herself with the tree. However, the larger the size of the plant, the more magic it would take to control it. Therefore, when fighting, she preferred to choose weeds, which had a faster effect and a lower cost. The way to use this ability was through contact, and it could be transmitted through a physical medium, such as the ground, with an effective range of about 5 meters. There was no doubt that this witch with long green hair was definitely a good helper in the development of agriculture. Her importance was self-evident. Industrialization required a large population, and a large population depended on enough food to support it. These food could either be produced by themselves or imported through trade. If the former didn't have efficient production capacity, most of the human resources would be tied to the land. The latter was even more difficult to achieve in an era when transportation was extremely underdeveloped. Now that he had harvested a druid, Roland hoped to use a small number of farmers to feed a large number of industrial people, speeding up the industrialization process of his territory. Therefore, in the future direction of practice, he decided to let Leaf improve the road of seeds, whether it was wheat or barley, as long as she could increase the yield of any one of them, he could greatly increase the upper limit of his territory's population. In addition, he heard that the fjords produced some unique food, which, according to Lightning's description, was very similar to potatoes and corn. If the rumors were true, then the plan to introduce these 2 crops had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. After all, wheat itself wasn't a high-yielding crop. After writing down the practice plan, Roland put her information aside and pulled out a second piece of paper from the table. The second witch to be questioned was called Scroll, and she was also the oldest of the 7 people. This year she was already close to 40 years old. This was a rare age among the witches. The older they got, the harder it was to resist the bite of magic. However, after seeing the description of her ability, Roland could also understand why Scroll could live until now. Her main ability was a memory that was far beyond that of ordinary people. After reaching adulthood, her ability had stabilized, and she could almost be said to have a photographic memory. At the same time, she had also obtained a very interesting branch ability. Scroll could turn the books she had read into reality for a short period of time, which Roland named Book of Illusion. Her main ability was almost always in effect, so every day of awakening Scroll could safely pass through it. This was also the reason why she was self-taught even though she was born in a poor family. This ability greatly improved her learning, especially when it came to learning words that needed to be memorized repeatedly. Every time she used her branch ability, it would consume all of her body's magic power. The time that the Book of Illusion could exist was determined by the remaining magic power, usually between a quarter of an hour to an hour. Chapter 98. The third witch was called Hummingbird. She was a short witch, just like her nickname. When asked about her ability, she was much more reserved than the other witches. She had just reached adulthood this winter, with symmetrical dimples, delicate facial features, and a soft voice. She looked exceptionally cute. Her ability was to lighten objects. After attaching her magic to an object, she could greatly reduce its weight. According to her, it was close to zero. After Roland let Hummingbird use her own teacup to demonstrate, he found that the cup could almost float in the air, that is to say, its weight was equal to that of air. Of course, in the eyes of the people of this era, air had no weight. It seemed that this was also the reason why the Witch Cooperation Association could cross the western border of Grey Castle without any supplies. With the little girl's help, bags of wheat and dried fish could be easily carried on the road. Only a few people could carry a large amount of supplies, which could greatly reduce the logistical pressure. Although Hummingbird was an adult, she didn't have a derivative ability. Her main ability had to be in contact with the target to be cast, and was ineffective against living beings. The larger the object, the longer the conversion time, and the more magic it consumed. Once the conversion was completed, it could last for several hours. This ability seemed to be very suitable for the transportation industry, and had great potential in the upcoming war. However, there were too many unknown factors, so further tests were needed to be done. Roland wrote at the bottom of the parchment, "Practice with stones of different weights, control the magic output, and accurately control the effective and ineffective time." After dealing with the training plans of the three witches, he asked the attendant to add a new candlestick, making the room brighter. But even so, under the wavering orange candlelight, reading and writing were both laborious for the eyes. Roland yawned. He spread out the parchment with the information of the fourth witch. The fourth witch had a rare surname. Her full name was Soroya Zuen, and she came from a merchant family in Grey Castle. She had short brown curly hair and a pair of slender eyes. The little freckles on the bridge of her nose didn't ruin her overall beauty, but instead made her exude a unique youthful vitality. Soroya had just turned 19, and her ability was very special. After she became an adult, she could draw the people and scenery that she saw or imagined. Coupled with her magic pen branch ability, she could draw photographic-like images without the aid of paint or relying on paper. This ability, which was comparable to a camera, had countless uses. As for training, she could draw a few pictures every day. He pulled out the next piece of paper. The fifth witch was called Echo. She was a woman from the southernmost region. She was tall and had brown skin. Her eyes and nose were typical of the Sand Nation. It was full of exotic charm. According to her, after awakening, she could initially imitate the chirping of animals. When they reached adulthood, they would be able to imitate any voice perfectly, without any branch abilities. Roland named her ability Voice Illusion. He had no idea what it could be used for now, but the requirement for practice was to shout a few times. The sixth witch to be questioned was Lily. She was only 16 years old, with 2 ponytails and a face as delicate as a doll. When she saw Roland, her expression was a bit stiff. Her ability was to prevent food from spoiling. She had only been awakened as a witch for a short year, but she was already the most popular character in the Witch Cooperation Association. Without her ability to preserve food, a lot of food would deteriorate and become moldy during the exile. Lily and Hummingbird supported the logistics of the Witch Cooperation Association. As for whether her ability to preserve food was achieved by killing bacteria with magic power, it was still unknown. Roland decided to let her use a variety of meat and fruit to practice, and also to test the longest preservation time under the condition that her magic power was exhausted. He rubbed his sore neck and stacked the information of the 6 witches into a pile. There was only one parchment left on the table. This was another surprise that Roland had discovered after learning about Leaf. The 7th witch, Mystery Moon. When she walked into the office, she looked very nervous. Nightingale comforted her for a long time and explained the reason in his ear. Originally, Mystery Moon's ability was the worst in the camp. It could be said that she was almost useless. She was only responsible for some chores that relied purely on human labor. In addition, she was often blamed by Kara, which made her timid. She was afraid that Roland would think that she was useless and drive her out of Border Town. Her main ability was to magnetize objects. Before she was an adult, she was only limited to metal objects, but after she became an adult, she could magnetize any object in her hands. She didn't have a branch of her ability, so she needed to touch the target to use it. The process was extremely slow. According to her, it would take half a day to magnetize a 1-foot square stone. For the Witch Cooperation Association, this was really useless. Magnets weren't something new. Ships sailing between the fjords and the mainland were equipped with navigation needles. There were many references on land, so they didn't need this kind of thing to quickly find the right direction. On the contrary, magnetized objects would cause trouble for everyone. For example, after Hummingbird lightened the iron pot, it would fly towards Mystery Moon. So Kara forbade her to use her power in the camp. But to Roland, this taciturn girl was a priceless treasure that had been delivered to his doorstep. This was also the reason why he wanted to hum Superstar. Was there any more appropriate lyrics than, "You are the electricity, you are the light"? Magnetism generates electricity, electricity generates magnetism. This was a knowledge that any science student would know by heart. In his heart, he thanked Faraday, Gauss, Ampere, and Maxwell. With electricity, there would be light. Maybe it wouldn't be long before he would be able to show another miracle in his territory. A witch who was forbidden to use her ability was still able to survive the demonic bite. Although she was introverted and self-abased, her will wasn't weak. At least, her desire to live was stronger than most people. Roland secretly rejoiced that she had joined the Witch Cooperation Association less than a year ago. Otherwise, over the years, she was likely to be buried alive by Kara. With a stroke of his pen, he set Mystery Moon's training for the next few days to magnetize various objects. He also determined the relationship between magic power consumption and magnetism. With the addition of these 7 witches, Roland's witch lineup suddenly increased to 12 people. After reading so many books, he had a general understanding of the manifestations of magic power. The traditional classification of combat type and non-combat type was not reasonable. He was more inclined to divide them according to the characteristics of their abilities. Generally speaking, the main abilities of witches could be divided into 3 categories. The first category was the self-strengthening type. This type of ability was very rare. So far, only Scroll belonged to this category. This was equivalent to a passive ability that was not affected by the God's Stone of Retaliation. Even if she wore a God's Stone of Retaliation, she could still have a photographic memory. The second category was the summoning type. Anna, Nightingale, Nana, Lightning, Vendi, Leaf, Soroya, Echo and Lily all belonged to this category. The characteristic was that the magic power could leave the body and take effect, although this distance was limited to within 5 meters. The summoning type of witches had the most varied abilities, and were also the most affected by the God's Stone of Retaliation. Once they entered the anti-magic area, any magic power effect would disappear. However, before the ability was stopped, the result was permanent and irreversible. The third category was the enchantment type. For example, Hummingbird and Mystery Moon. The magic power was cast through contact with the target. The transformation process was slow and consumed a lot of magic power. At the same time, it could be interrupted by the God's Stone of Retaliation. However, once the transformation was completed, it would become an inherent property of the object, and would still be effective in the anti-magic area. The enchantment had a time limit, and the duration was related to the volume of the object and the user's magic power. This was probably the reason why the God's Stone of Retaliation could not eliminate the magic bite. Roland thought. The God's Stone of Retaliation did not affect the gathering and flow of magic power. It affected the process of magic power transformation. Generally speaking, it was aimed at the customer's front end, not the back-end data. Chapter 99. The witches were still awake. After experiencing a series of hardships, they still couldn't believe that they had been taken in by the prince. No shackles, no guards, how could they live in such a spacious and comfortable room in the castle? Vendi probably guessed the uneasiness of her sisters. She and Nightingale called everyone to her room, sat around the bed in a circle, and chatted to calm everyone's mood. This is the demeanor of a leader, Leaf thought. If it was Kara, she would never be so careful, or even if she noticed it, she wouldn't have the leisure to comfort her sisters. Sister Vendi, His Royal Highness, what would he want us to do? Hummingbird asked timidly. Compared to you and Sister Nightingale, our abilities are far inferior. Her words resonated with the other sisters, and they all nodded. Vendi burst into laughter. Let me think, the first thing you have to do is to practice your ability. Practice ability? Soroya hesitated. Will His Royal Highness make me keep drawing? It's very possible. Vendi patted Mystery Moon, who had her head down. You too, although Kara forbade you to use your ability in the camp, His Royal Highness won't. On the contrary, he will only encourage everyone to practice and master their abilities as much as possible. My ability will bring trouble to the sisters, Mystery Moon whispered. You still have to practice, Vendi said resolutely. It's related to our life and death. Life and death? Leaf couldn't help but ask. Yes, His Royal Highness Roland found a way for us witches to safely pass the Day of Awakening. Nightingale took over from Vendi. From now on, we can say goodbye to the pain of magic bite, and all sisters can live smoothly until adulthood. All the witches widened their eyes and looked at Nightingale. For a moment, they couldn't believe their ears. Scroll asked in surprise, is it the Miss Anna you mentioned last time? But you said at the time that you didn't know the specific reason. Yes, at that time it was only His Highness' guess, but later on Nana's Day of Awakening confirmed this. She was also not harmed in any way. Then this method is... Scroll couldn't help but hold her breath. As long as I consume magic power every day, Nightingale said word by word, I can see the changes in magic power in the fog. Regular use of it would increase the total capacity of the body, and at the same time, the pain of body devouring would be reduced. When it's close to the Day of Awakening, as long as all the magic power is consumed, it will hardly cause any harm to the body. I think everyone can faintly feel it too, Vendi added. During the days when we were being hunted by the church, we felt that we were being hunted down. We carefully hid in the corners of the town, not daring to use our abilities. As a result, many sisters left us every winter. But this year, in the camp of the impassable mountain range, except for Ainan and Ike, everyone survived the months of demons. So that's how it is. Leaf took a deep breath. This was the demonic bite that she had encountered in the barbarian land. The reason why the duration was so short. In other words, the Holy Mountain is not in that uninhabited place. Yes, the Holy Mountain is not a specific place, Vendi nodded. As long as it accepts us, doesn't regard witches as demons, and doesn't restrict us from using our abilities, it is the Holy Mountain. Vendi also made a request to His Highness Roland. She wanted to go back to the camp after the months of demons and tell everyone this news. Nightingale looked at Vendi and said softly, even if you don't find the Holy Mountain, you can still live well in the mountains. Since everyone is back, there is no need to mention this, Vendi smiled and shook her head. So, whether His Highness needs your ability or not, for your own safety, you have to practice it every day. If this is the key to resolving the magic bite, will there be other witches who have already noticed it? Scroll thought for a moment and said, we are not the first witch organization to gather together. In the Kingdom of Dawn and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, there are other witch associations. I have sent letters to them, wanting to invite them to search for the Holy Mountain together, but I have never received a reply. Leaf sighed softly. She knew that Scroll still had something to say. Since Kara found the ancient book in an underground ruin in the eastern forest, she had firmly led everyone on the road to find the Holy Mountain. At this point, the Witch Cooperation Association began a long journey of exile, almost through the entire Grey Castle. Along the way, everyone met many new sisters, but also lost a lot of sisters. If they had chosen to hide in the ruins from the beginning, would they have found this key in advance? We can try to contact the witches hidden in other cities, Nightingale said. His Highness Roland also has this plan. He wants to release rumors to make the witches pay attention to this remote town. If we can act as a middleman, there is no doubt that it will greatly reduce their vigilance. But I still don't understand, in the end, why did His Highness take us in? Echo was at a loss. This foreign woman from the southernmost region had a much worse experience than most witches. She was first sold by the Sand Nation to a merchant in the port of Clearwater, and then later resold all the way to King's City. She was forced to learn dancing and court etiquette, and even skills to please men. If she hadn't happened to be rescued by the Witch Cooperation Association, she would have been sold at a high price to a duke or a minister. Until now, when she spoke, she still had a distinct foreign accent. Maybe he's just like those people who want to buy you. Lily curled her lips. Men. Don't talk nonsense, Lily, Nightingale said in a displeased tone. His Highness Roland is different from those people. As long as we live here for a while, we will naturally understand. That's right, I have a deep understanding of this. Vendi still had a gentle smile on her face. It's already late, everyone should go back to their rooms and sleep. Even if your ability doesn't work, you don't need to worry. His Highness said that he wants the witches in his territory to be able to live a normal life. If you want to know what His Highness will have you do tomorrow, she deliberately paused, I think, he will probably start by filling out a contract. Leaf and Scroll returned to their room, the latter closed the door. We should also sleep. Yes. When she had asked about her ability, His Highness had arranged for her and Scroll to stay in the same room, but also said that this was only a temporary arrangement. Later on Border Town would provide a new single room. But in her opinion, sleeping 3 people in such a spacious bed would not be a problem. She took off her coat and crawled into the quilt. An indescribable softness and comfort suddenly wrapped her whole body. Leaf couldn't help but let out a soft moan, burying her head in the pillow. After a long time, she softly asked, Do you blame Kara? Scroll sighed. No one can predict the future, no matter what she did later. At least at the beginning she sincerely wanted to find a home where witches could live in peace. Now it's meaningless to mention this. Sleep, child. Chapter 100. Just as Vendi had said, the next morning, the witches were called to the first floor by the maids. After breakfast, the prince handed each of them a piece of fine parchment. Considering that some of the witches couldn't read the words, Scroll repeated the contents to everyone. Then they signed and pressed their fingerprints. Roland knew that it was difficult for them to really understand the meaning of each line of the contract, but it didn't matter, they would eventually understand. He also knew that even if it was a contract of slavery, they would still sign their names at this moment. Roland didn't feel that providing a relatively generous contract was an act that would make him suffer a loss. Since he had chosen to walk this path, he had to look further. What he was doing now was to form a good cycle in the future, a win-win framework that could be implemented in the long run. After putting away the contract, Roland arranged everyone's training tasks according to the plan he had drawn up last night, and then called Leaf, Scroll and Soroya to follow him back to the office. After closing the door, Nightingale appeared and winked at her sisters. I've been thinking about what Vendi told me yesterday. Roland opened the curtains, letting the bright sunshine into the room. She said that you encountered a terrible monster, and in the end, only 7 of you survived. Even the mentor of the Witch Cooperation Association, Kara, died in the barbarian land. I want to know, in the end, what did you encounter? A hybrid demonic beast. Leaf was the first to speak. It wasn't a demonic beast, they were demons from the gates of hell. They had a tall body, could control demonic beasts, and also had magic, just like. She hesitated, just like us. Demons? Roland frowned and looked at Soroya. Were you there at the time? The latter nodded. You can draw the scene at that time, right? Roland handed over a piece of paper. Soroya closed her eyes, looking a little pained, but she still took the paper. She walked to the table. As she used her ability, a faintly discernible quill appeared in her hand. The tip of the quill glowed with a colorful light. Then, it flew out of her hand and started writing on the paper. A vivid picture gradually appeared on the paper, but Soroya never opened her eyes. Roland moved closer to the table. The picture on the paper was extremely realistic. No, he told himself, it was not a picture, but a real-time recording of the scene at that time. Her ability was like a video camera, replaying the massacre in the wildlands from a first-person perspective. When she finished painting, Soroya's forehead was covered with sweat. Obviously, this memory was like a nightmare to her. Nightingale poked her head over and asked, "Is this a demon?" "That's them," Leaf pointed to the one closest to her. "This demon is wearing metal gloves. He can summon lightning to attack. He's also very strong." More than a dozen sisters died in his hands. The devil in the distance could throw a spear several times faster than a crossbow bolt. However, their special attacks could not be used continuously. "I took this opportunity to kill them." "You alone?" Roland asked. "The leather tube under the demonic beast's helmet is the devil's weakness," Leaf pointed to the iron devil's neck. "Kara's magic snake bit off his tube and eventually died together with him. I used the same method to kill the other one with a crossbow. The tube seemed to store some red gas. When the gas leaked out, they died. Well, this thing looked like an oxygen tank no matter how he looked at it. How could there be such a creature in the wasteland?" Roland was puzzled. But to say that they were aliens was obviously not at that level. Looking at the leather tube full of patches and the clothes made of animal skin, it could only be said that the level of civilization was comparable to that of his own. Whether it was through technology or magic, the fact that they could take the initiative to go to other planets showed their strength. The Earthlings even had to stagger to land on the moon. Of course, he couldn't rule out some strange civilizations with crooked talents. Roland thought, in short, the devils were not invincible enemies, they could also be killed. "In addition to the devils, we also saw a floating city," said Leaf. "No matter how far we went, it was still in front of us. Lightning once mentioned in her adventure story that it seemed to be a mirage." "Can you draw it?" Roland asked Soroya. She nodded, summoned the magic pen again, and drew the floating city that Leaf had mentioned on the paper. Roland carefully looked at the picture, but there was not much information in the blurred picture. If the city was really a mirage, then at least it meant that the real body was somewhere in the wasteland. And the blood mist over the city was the gas that the devils breathed. This explanation was much more reliable than what the aliens had said. After all, the vast continent west of the impassable mountain range was a mysterious area that no one had ever set foot in, so it was not surprising that other races existed. Now there was only one question left. "I heard Nightingale and Vendi mention that Kara decided to look for the Holy Mountain because of an ancient book," Roland asked. "Scroll, have you read that book?" Scroll hesitated for a moment. Kara didn't allow anyone to read that book, but "I've peeked at it. The words recorded in it are messy and incredible. Can you make a copy of it?" "Let me see." "That's not true, Your Highness, the non-existence of the Holy Mountain has proved this." She sighed and raised her right hand. "I hope you won't be fooled by the contents of the book." A gold-rimmed book appeared in the air, the cover opened to both sides, the pages flipped quickly, and then with a bang, it closed and fell into her hand. "Your Highness, I hope that you are the only one who reads it. I don't want to see other sisters become like Kara." Roland took the book. "I know." After the witches left the office, Nightingale quietly appeared beside the sofa. As usual, she lifted her robe, put her feet on the low table, and chewed dried fish slices. "Don't you want to come and see?" Roland asked with a smile. Nightingale snorted disdainfully. "I'm not interested in the things that lunatics like to read." He shook his head, sat back at the table, and carefully turned the pages, as if the book really had magic. As Scroll had said, most of the content was difficult to understand, and it seemed that the language and grammar were not the current way of writing. The text mentioned the bloody moon and the huge stone gate, but he didn't see the two words, Holy Mountain. In fact, except for a few words that he could occasionally understand, the rest of the content was basically unreadable. To sum it up, "I know every word, but I can't understand them at all." He didn't know if it was because Scroll was panicking and peaked, which caused the content to be missing, or if the book itself was like this. Roland skipped those lengthy paragraphs and directly flipped to the back. It was a rather thick book, and only the first few pages had content, the rest were all blank. From the last page onwards, the handwriting suddenly changed, the previous neat handwriting became sloppy, as if it had been hastily jotted down, but the content was clear and easy to understand. Chapter 101. What does it mean? Roland stroked the line of words. Did the owner of the ancient book fight with the monsters in the barbarian land? He moved his gaze downwards. There are more and more demons, and fewer of us. Even the god's stone of retaliation cannot stop their attack. Just by relying on their unparalleled strength, even without relying on magic power, they would still be ferocious and terrifying enemies. The holy city of Tequila has fallen, and we have fled in all directions. Over the mountains, across the rivers, run as far as you can from the gates of hell. But next time, where can we escape to? But this is not something I need to think about. I am dying, Natalia. The power of the demons is corroding me, and no medicine will work. I'm writing all this because I have a favor to ask of you. Alice's experiment with the God's Punishment Army is coming to an end. The experiment was very successful, and the extraordinary warriors are not inferior to the demons. But she forgot that even if the God's Punishment Army wins, the victory will not belong to us. Yes, the God's Punishment Army will only bring destruction to us. Go and stop her. Only you can do it. This passage was not long. After reading it from beginning to end, Roland closed his eyes and tried to put himself in Kara's point of view. If she did not know the existence of the demons and replaced the demons with witches, she could easily imagine the church's army retreating under the attack of the witches. Then combined with the widespread rumors that witches were the minions of the demons, and that their magic came from the gates of hell. Kara was very likely to think that the church actually wanted to hide the truth. The so-called gates of hell were the entrance to the holy mountain. For hundreds of years, witches had gone to the holy mountain and obtained eternal life there. So there were more and more witches. And the church's soldiers were getting fewer and fewer. Of course, there were many loopholes in this speculation. For example, the notes mentioned that the demons had extraordinary strength, which was obviously not a characteristic of witches. Another example was that witches could defeat the church's army under the influence of the god's stone of retaliation, which seemed too bizarre. So what made Kara decide to go to the barbarian land, he still did not know. Was it her excessive eagerness that affected her judgment? Or was there a part of the content that he did not peek at, and that was the real reason? Roland was leaning towards the latter. At least now he knew that the demons described on the last page of the scribbled notes were not witches, but real otherworldlings. However, this did not reduce his doubts at all. Instead, it increased the number of unknown problems. When had the church ever fought with the demons? Roland flipped through the fourth prince's pitiful knowledge of mysticism. He couldn't find any related content. Ever since the end of the War of Faith, the church had established its base camp in the north to resist the demonic beasts that invaded the mainland from the Big Breach. Later, they simply built a magnificent fortress city on the Hermes Plateau and called it the New Holy City. These two connected cities, one high and one low, were used to fight against demonic beasts. Not the devil. Besides, he had never heard of the name Tequila. If these things were true, the church had no reason to hide it. In the books that recorded the history of the church, every successful defense against demonic beasts and major victory against witches would be described in detail, as if they were afraid that others would not know of their achievements. But fighting against the demons was more worthy of being written about than fighting against demonic beasts and witches. The last question was about the God's Punishment Army. Obviously, this member of the church did not want to see the God's Punishment Army appear and entrusted others to stop the person in charge of the experiment. It seemed that it was successful. Roland only knew that the church had the army of judges. But he had never heard of the God's Punishment Army, of course, he could not rule out the fact that the fourth prince was ignorant. However, if they could really cultivate powerful warriors that could fight against the demons, it would only increase the strength of the church. Why did the author of the notebook think that the god's punishment army would bring destruction? What Scroll thought was inconceivable should be the latter 2 points. Do you know where you got the ancient book that led Kara astray? Roland looked up at Nightingale. When I joined the Witch Cooperation Association, my sisters had already set foot on the road to find the mountain. Nightingale chewed on dried fish and said in a vague voice, but Vendi once mentioned that the Witch Cooperation Association was not originally called the Witch Cooperation Association. It was just a group of witches from Seawanshire, including Kara, Vendi and Scroll. Later, they found a hidden place in the forest not far from Seawanshire and used it as a secret meeting place. I didn't expect that it was actually the entrance to an underground ruin. She swallowed the snack in her mouth and licked her lips, but except for Kara, no one went down to explore. Was the ancient book found in the ruins? Anyway, that's what Kara claimed. Nightingale curled her lips. Later, there were more and more witches gathered. Maybe someone accidentally leaked their whereabouts during a meeting, so the church sent a large group of judges to surround the forest. More than 20 witches escaped, less than half of them. From then on, Kara decided to go to the impassable mountain range to find the Holy Mountain. So they called themselves the Witch Cooperation Association and set finding the Holy Mountain as the highest goal of their members. After listening to this, Roland fell into deep thought. Adding 2 little mystic points was so troublesome. Anything related to history and legends, his mind was basically a blank. The ancient book didn't mention the specific year, so he didn't know if other history books had any records of this war. The first person involved was already dead. If only I could go to the ruins to explore it, he thought. But Roland also knew that this was basically impossible to achieve. The eastern forest was too far away from him. Compared to a trip across the entire Grey Castle, developing his territory was his top priority. Walking to the window, Roland looked through the floor-to-ceiling window at the garden under his feet. The witches were training their abilities according to his orders. Now that he had 12 witches under his command, it was time to establish an organization. In his mind, this organization didn't need any program or guidelines. It was set up to facilitate the management of witches and the reasonable use of their abilities. Its function was similar to the industry guilds in the future. The rules of the organization were as simple as possible, with only 2 rules: don't use your abilities to violate the territory laws. Don't use your abilities to evade the law. Roland initially wanted to imitate the 3 laws of robotics and restrict the witches from using their abilities to harm or attack ordinary people, but later he felt that it was unnecessary. For them, abilities were just like guns in the hands of ordinary people. When they encountered danger, there was no essential difference between using a gun and using their abilities to fight back. Moreover, deliberately emphasizing the difference between witches and ordinary people would only make the gap between the 2 groups bigger and bigger. Therefore, not breaking the law and not evading responsibility was the most concise expression that a technical dog could think of. As for the name of the organization, Roland had already thought about it. Chapter 102. At night, the mansion of the Elk family was brightly lit. When Perrault, who held the invitation, was ushered into the hall by the attendants, the birthday banquet for Aurelia, the 3rd daughter of the Elk family, had just begun. Those who were able to participate in the banquet were all nobles of Longsong Stronghold with a considerable family background and prestige. The Earl also attached great importance to this birthday banquet, which could be seen from the wool carpet that was spread all over the hall and the uniform of the attendants who were wearing black with gold edging. After all, Aurelia had just turned 16 years old and was at the age to talk about marriage. String music sounded, and attendants walked through the crowd with wine and wine glasses. Several round tables in the hall were filled with steaming hot cooked food. The protagonist, Aurelia, was dressed like a canary and was surrounded by a group of sisters in a corner of the hall. They seemed to be chatting happily. This was the most popular banquet style in King City. The previous banquets in the western region were not like this, thought Perrault. Usually, people sat around a long wooden table and waited for the chef to serve the dishes. The dishes served were large bowls of pork and whole chicken, buttered bread, double-fried eggs, and large plates of lettuce. But for Perrault, who had also stayed in King's City for several years, this birthday banquet was just an imitation. For example, the wine glasses in the hands of the attendants were all colored glasses, not transparent and clean glasses. After pouring wine into the glasses, they could not bring out the wine's own mellow color. The round table should be covered with white cloth instead of exposing the greasy surface. As for the cooked food, it still maintained the traditional style of the Western region, big and thick. Perrault shook his head. At least let the chef cut it into small pieces before serving it. According to the usual practice, he had already filled his stomach at home before coming to the banquet, so he would not cut these large pieces of cooked meat at this time. The invitees to the banquet all represented the faces of their families, and it would really damage their image if they ate here with their mouths glistening with grease. Perrault did not want to be treated as a joke in the mouths of the young ladies. "Long time no see, buddy." Suddenly, someone hooked his neck from behind. "I heard that you were appointed as an envoy by the Lord again. How was the ore harvest in Border Town? You must have taken a lot from there." This familiar voice belonged to Ren Med, the second son of the Elk family, a fool who only wanted to become a famous knight and didn't even care about his territory. Of course, he was also his friend. Not bad. Perrault didn't want to talk about his experience in Border Town. "Did you have any use in Coldwind Ridge this time? Or did you just stay in Hermes Tavern and shiver?" "Damn it." Ren pushed Perrault. "I've never heard you say anything nice. This time, I didn't even go to the new holy city. The day before the border guards set off, I caught a cold and was bedridden for a whole week." "Not bad. You've improved a little compared to last time. At least you've saved the guards a lot of trouble." "You're wrong this time." Ren suddenly smiled mysteriously. "If I hadn't been bedridden for a week in Coldwind Ridge, I'm afraid I would have been lying on the cold walls of the holy city forever." "What do you mean?" Perrault raised his eyebrows. "I also heard it from others." The second son of the Elk family whispered in Roland's ear. "The new holy city almost fell and the demonic beasts rushed into the inner city. If the church hadn't sent their strongest warriors, I'm afraid they wouldn't have been able to protect the holy city cathedral. However, the armies of the four kingdoms suffered heavy losses. Only a few people from Coldwind Ridge came back. In just 1 month, the whole city was full of widows. Those who don't usually have savings." He blinked and stretched out 2 fingers. 2 silver royals is enough." "Hey, don't look at me like that. I didn't do anything." "Are you sure this news is true? What about the border guards?" "Of course, I saw it with my own eyes. The Lord fell ill the same day he received the news." Ren shrugged. "As for the guards, what else can we do? We can only slowly recruit them. Right now, the northern region is in urgent need of experienced warriors. If my family didn't call me back, I could at least lead a cavalry team." This is not the point, Perrault thought. The main defense of the border guards in Coldwind Ridge was the church's army of judges. Now the generals and warriors of the four kingdoms were buried in Hermes. No matter how you look at it, it smells like a conspiracy. If they were plotting something, the north of Greycastle was now like a naked woman. What about the army of judges? What are their losses? Not much better than the armies of the four kingdoms. If you think about it, they are always the fanatics who rush to the front. Then again, if the army of judges doesn't go to the front, the troops of the other countries will certainly not move. He said disdainfully. Those knights are all like this. They talk about honor, but when it comes to fighting against the demonic beasts, they like to hide in the back. For example, the one in front of me. Perrault smiled. Maybe I'm thinking too much. But even if the church wants to attack the north, it has nothing to do with Longsong's stronghold. Let the new king worry about this. Unfortunately, No one has accepted my allegiance, or rather, I haven't found anyone who is qualified. Ren paused and looked towards the door. The people of the wolf family are coming. I'll go greet them first. I'll come back later to find you. Go, don't come back. By the way, Roland had only walked 2 steps when he turned back. Did you notice the handkerchief in the invitation? Did you put it there? Oh, I'll only give you a pair of socks that have been worn for 2 days. He shook his finger. My sister cut them herself. Although the age gap between you is a bit big, but as long as you have the intention, I will certainly support you both. Don't delay it anymore, my friend. You are already 22 years old. Perrault gave him a supercilious look. The latter whistled and walked away with a smile. Taking a glass of wine from the waiter's plate, Perrault walked alone to the corner, quietly looking at the lively hall. He noticed that while Aurelia was chatting happily with her sisters, she would steal glances at him from time to time. Just a moment ago, when their eyes met, he could see the other's quickly moving line of sight and her cheeks showing a touch of embarrassment. Perrault returned a polite smile. But in his eyes, the other was just a little girl. Suddenly, a fierce discussion broke out on the side of the hall, attracting everyone's attention. What? He really dared to say that? Yes, that coward Cornelius, he didn't even dare to fart and came back with his tail between his legs. The man with the loudest voice said, he's simply a disgrace to Longsong's stronghold. Perrault knew him. He seemed to be called Simon Airy, a branch of the wolf family. He had married a rather beautiful woman. He had also seen that woman, and she was indeed charming. You speak as if you have a way to solve it. Someone sneered. I may not be able to do it alone, but if His Excellency the Duke pays attention to this absurd matter, I don't believe that Roland Wimbledon would dare to act so recklessly. Chapter 103. Perrault leaned towards the crowd. What happened? He asked. Sir Hull, someone saw the honeysuckle emblem on his chest. We are talking about the Lord of Border Town. He confiscated the property of the nobles in Longsong's stronghold. Call me Perrault. What is the specific situation? I will explain it to Mr. Perrault. Simon squeezed his way forward, showing a flattering smile. It is like this. Under the orders of the Duke, we usually live in Border Town and manage the North Slope mine for the Lord. Every winter we will bring the townspeople back to Longsong's stronghold to protect them from the demonic beasts. At the end of this year's Months of the Demons, one of my colleagues, Cornelius of the Fletcher family, was unexpectedly told by the Lord of Border Town that his house had been demolished by the townspeople without any compensation. Either you admit that the house doesn't belong to you, or you will be sent to prison and hanged for desertion. He imitated the words of the 4th Prince Roland. Sir, what is called desertion? This is what every mine manager has done for hundreds of years. Perrault's mind could not help but recall the appearance of the young grey-haired man, although the outside world said that the prince was extremely unbearable, but from his 2 personal experiences with him, he knew that Roland Wimbledon was by no means an ordinary person. And in this way of dealing with the crime of desertion, it was just an excuse that the other side casually found. The prince had never thought of using reason to convince these people. He has completely broken off relations with Longsong's stronghold, Perrault thought, or to think deeper, does the prince not know that every year the townspeople and nobles go to Longsong's stronghold to take refuge? Obviously not. He clearly knows, but he still imposed a crime, forced the other side to make a choice, and even let the other side send such a barbaric result back to Longsong's stronghold. In the end, what does the prince want to do? But he is the Lord of Border Town, said the man who had previously laughed at Simon. The Lord has the right to rule the laws of his territory. Border Town is also under the jurisdiction of the Western Territory. Simon said coldly, displeased. Do you question Lord Ryan's authority? Being stationed in the small town to supervise the work in the mine was the Lord's idea. Now that Roland has occupied all the houses of the nobles, he is openly opposing the 6 great families. Lord Lionheart will not sit idly by. Are you talking about the executioner who hanged Hills Med and didn't even give him a letter? Ren came over at some point in time. My father was furious with thunder because of this. Lord Med, said Simeon, saluting, it is this man. Now that he's acting even more wildly, I'm afraid only His Excellency the Duke can stop him. I hope you can convey this message to us. Don't worry. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Lord Ryan is prepared to deal with him. Ren said indifferently, I came back for this. My brother is negotiating a trade deal in King's City. I'm the only one who can lead the Elk family. Really? That's wonderful, said Simon joyfully. Perrault frowned. Although he knew that since the winter letter was sent, His Royal Highness the Prince had chosen to stay in Border Town, sooner or later there would be such a day. But he had never thought that his friend would also have to put on his armor and go into battle. Ignoring the strange eyes of the crowd, he directly pulled Ren to the side and dissuaded him, Don't go, that's the prince. I know he's the prince of the mountains, Ren Med patted Perrault's shoulder. Don't worry, Lord Ryan won't hurt a prince. Maybe as soon as we get there, he'll directly surrender. Even if he wants to resist, as long as we get on our horses, wouldn't all the farmers and miners run away? The fourth prince doesn't know how to wield a sword or a gun, I don't think he'll be able to hurt even a hair. No, I'm worried that you'll be hurt by him. Perrault opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He knew that the other side wouldn't believe him, because even he himself found it hard to believe that the prince could rely on those miners to defeat the Duke's coalition. But he didn't know why, but he always felt a little uneasy. Young Master Perrault, your father wants you to go back, he has something important to talk to you about. A white-haired steward suddenly rushed to Perrault's side and whispered in his ear. I know, Perrault nodded, and after saying goodbye to Ren in advance, he sat in the carriage with the steward and returned to Count Honeysuckle's mansion. Father. He walked into the study, where Shalafi Hull was writing something on the table. Hearing Perrault's voice, the Count didn't stop writing, You go and summarize the output of the territory, the number of people, and the income separately, and give them to me. I'll arrange the spring expedition. The Duke Ryan's conscription order has already been issued. After the snow melts, our 5 families will provide knight and mercenaries for him to go to Border Town. How much? The Count's hands slightly paused, and he raised his head, What's wrong, you've never cared about this kind of problem before. He opened the letter on the table, the knight will have at least 25 people, as well as the corresponding squires and horses. The mercenaries will have 40 people, and they must be fully armed. If there are more than 100 freedmen or serfs, they should be equipped with simple weapons. Perrault calculated in his heart, so the 5 families added up to about 1,000 people, plus the Duke's own troops, it could already be regarded as a force that could sweep through the western region. Even if Longsong's stronghold didn't turn out in full force, this team was still not something that Border Town could resist. There were only a total of more than 2,000 people there. Father, can you not go to the battlefield? He hesitated, but still opened his mouth. What's wrong, son? The Count asked strangely. I'm worried about your safety. Shalafi couldn't help but laugh. Do you know what you're saying? An elephant trampling an ant to death, what kind of danger can there be? His Royal Highness only has a few knights and less than 50 personal guards, but we have 10 times as many people as he does. In theory, this was indeed the case. Before he had seen His Royal Highness, Perrault would also think so. But, Father, everyone says that the walls made of mud will collapse when it rains, but His Royal Highness presided over the construction of the walls. They also say that it is impossible to stop the demonic beasts by relying only on the miners of Border Town, but His Royal Highness not only achieved this, even after the end of the months of the demons, no one escaped back to Longsong's stronghold. The more he said, the more uneasy he became. Now, everyone thinks that the Duke's victory over Roland Wimbledon was nothing more than an elephant running over an ant. Father, will the result really be like this? Enough. Shalafi slammed the table. He shook his head, stood up, and went to the wall where the portraits of the ancestors were hung. Compared to fighting on horseback, you prefer to do business and talk about business, which is normal. But being a businessman doesn't mean being timid. Those merchants who sail across the ocean face the threat of death every day. He knocked on the wall and said loudly, "Look at this. Your grandfather, your grandfather's grandfather, they all relied on swords and longbows to gain a foothold in this place full of beasts, refugees, and bandits. You are so afraid of fighting, it really disappoints me." Chapter 104. On a sunny afternoon, Roland fulfilled his promise. He conferred the title of Viscount to Sir Pine. His territory was divided to the south of the Redwater River, across the river from Border Town. Today, it was still a dense forest, belonging to the undeveloped area. In order to make him give up the autonomy of his territory, Roland promised to give priority to the development of Sir Pine's territory. He also promised to give some shares to the Viscount and his descendants. Of course, Roland used his verbal skills to describe it as a good thing that he didn't need to manage his own property, and could just lie down and share the money. Sir Pine readily agreed. He didn't like these things. In his opinion, there was nothing more interesting than fighting on horseback. But now that he had a daughter, he put all his energy into hunting. In addition, Sir Pine's original territory had long been in decline, so he simply asked the prince to send someone to help him sell the land east of Longsong's stronghold and move his whole family to Border Town. Roland naturally agreed. The other person was Brian. Roland granted him the status of a knight, and asked him whether he wanted to choose the land or to serve in the army. If he chose the land, he couldn't join the first army in Border Town. If he joined the army, he would have to rely on his military achievements to be promoted and get rewarded land. Brian didn't hesitate to choose the latter. In this way, Roland had a general layout of the land use plan. The land between the Redwater River and the impassable mountain range was the residential area. The narrowest part was about 3 kilometers, and the widest part was about 7 or 8 kilometers. In the future, it could be used to build a community, or it could be used as a reward for promoted officers. On the other side of the Redwater River was the future industrial and agricultural area. The land could be extended to the south, but at present it was still a forest, and in the distance there were undulating hills. When the population met the demand, Roland would inevitably start to reclaim the forest. The concealing forest to the west of Border Town was also an important development point. There were all kinds of treasures in the forest, such as wood, edible fungi, wild animals, and medicinal herbs. In addition to being used for construction and industry, wood could also be used as fuel. The area of this forest was astonishingly large. Roland had asked Lightning to explore it, and even after flying for 30 kilometers, they still couldn't see the end of it. Even if they used all of it as firewood, it would still burn for a long time. Finally, there was the open space between the concealing forest and the impassable mountain range. It was also a forbidden area that no one had ever set foot in, the Savage Land. Based on the direction of the mountain range and the forest, the land in between was extremely vast, almost larger than the kingdom of Greycastle. Faced with such an unclaimed land, Roland's heart itched. But he also knew that he couldn't care about this place for the time being. At present, what Border Town needed the most was population. Returning to his office in the castle, he summoned the artist Soroya. "How's the work with City Hall going? I've never painted so many pictures in one day." She looked much more energetic than when they first met. "I've basically finished painting by today. But when I paint, I only leave a window the size of a head, which feels a little strange." In order to avoid scaring the townspeople with your magic pen, the prince smiled. "Although they know that witches exist, such close contact is still easy to cause accidents, so we simply take some hidden means, so that they don't know that you're a witch. In the future, it will slowly get better." Soroya's photographic ability brought a new upgrade to Roland's citizen registration plan. For this plan, City Hall vacated a room as an archive, which was used to store the information of the townspeople. Similar to the household register, each piece of paper had their name, age, residence, blood relationship, and other information. Berev had made a simple count of this information during the winter, and this time, the records had been expanded by a lot. The biggest change was that all the people's household registers were attached with color photos. According to Roland's request, City Hall had set up a small room in the hall for a single person to enter and exit. The room was wrapped in linen, leaving only a square window in front of it, so that Soroya could see the other person's appearance. This way, when the witch painted the portrait inside the room, the other person wouldn't see the magical pen. As for how to make the residents of the territory actively come to report their information, Roland's method was very simple. Every person who came would receive a subsidy of 10 copper royals. This money would be allocated by City Hall. Today, I called you here because I want you to draw something else. Roland spread out the cut paper in front of Soroya. The latter noticed that the size of the paper was exactly the same, only half the size of a palm, in a rectangular shape. What do you want me to draw? Some props for entertainment, Roland said. This idea had already existed in his mind for a long time. Besides practicing every day, the witches basically had nothing to do, so this kind of life seemed a bit boring. It was the same for the prince, especially when he was waiting for the snow to melt. His range of activities was basically limited to the castle. Therefore, it was imperative to find some entertainment activities and find a few witches to accompany him to relax his mood. The easiest one was naturally playing cards. However, the soft ordinary paper was not suitable to be used in the hands, and shuffling the cards was also troublesome. Now that he had Soroya, he could naturally consider making some more advanced things. Entertainment? She tilted her head and thought. It seemed that she didn't understand what kind of entertainment drawing on a square piece of paper was. Well, you have the final say. First, you draw a soldier holding a heavy crossbow on this piece of paper. Imagine. Yes, his armor, body, age, as well as the environment, all of it is up to you to imagine. As long as he is holding a heavy crossbow. Ah. I'll try. Soroya closed her eyes and thought for a moment, then a colorful magic pen appeared in her hand. Soon, a middle-aged man who looked like a crossbowman jumped on the paper. Very good, Roland praised. Let me think about what to draw next. In the upper left corner and the middle of the paper, draw a small circle. He recalled the appearance of the cards in his mind. The first circle should be white with gold edges, and the second circle should be orange with gold edges. After these drawings were finished, Roland asked her to add a number to the first circle, and add a bow and arrow symbol to the second circle. The magical thing about Soroya's ability was that she could draw regardless of the material, so there was no difference between a blank piece of paper and a piece of paper with a pattern. The pattern drawn on the latter could perfectly cover the former, just like a layer of cover. Thus, a delicate, crossbowman card appeared in front of Roland. Is this good? She asked. This is just a unit card. There are still many similar cards to draw, and in the end, we can make a deck of cards, then I'll teach you how to play. Looking at the way Soroya drew with her eyes closed, Roland had a premonition that perhaps this kind of dialogue would soon fill his castle. Chapter 105. Echo was sitting at the top of the castle, on the roof of the watchtower, from where she could see the whole town. She had asked lightning to take her up, and when the sun went down, the little girl would come back to send her down. Now, lightning should be on the way to Longsong's stronghold. Today's weather was very good, the sun shone brightly on the earth, and the distant river was like a shining silk, slowly flowing west, dividing the green leaves and snow into two parts. Lying in the sun, she felt that her whole body was surrounded by a soft warmth, unlike the scorching sun in the southernmost region, where the hot light easily hurt her skin. The wind was also very different, she thought. There were many kinds of wind in the mainland kingdom. There was the slightly salty sea breeze in the port of Clearwater, there was the hot and humid monsoon wind in King's City, there was the bone-chilling north wind in the impassable mountain range, and now there was the breeze with the fragrance of the earth in Border Town. In any case, the wind here was pure and single. But in Iron Sand City, it was either hot and windless, or overwhelming storms. The wind was visible. The whistling airflow was mixed with pebbles and gravel, like a giant black beast sweeping over. At this time, it was necessary to hide in a house, or any place that could avoid the wind. standing against the wind would only lead to death. Echo gently exhaled. Now that she thought about it, it had been nearly 4 years since she left Iron Sand City. Osha clan was unfortunately defeated in the struggle for power, and after her father surrendered, he was still killed by the enemy. She had witnessed all this and wanted to rush up and die together with the enemy, but she was hit from behind. She didn't know how many people in the clan were still alive after 4 years. Before she was sold as a slave to the port of Clearwater, she had heard that the Osha clan had violated the agreement of the Holy Duel, and that the clansmen who were spurned by the 3 gods would be banished to the Endless Cape, never to return to the Iron Sand City. But Echo knew that all of this was a conspiracy of the Iron Whip clan. They smeared the whip with black oil that flowed from the ground, and once it was ignited, even water couldn't extinguish it. It was this trick that caused her brother, the strongest warrior in the clan, to be burned alive during the duel, leading to chaos in the team formation. Other than the boiling yellow sand in the Endless Cape, there was only the eternal pillar of fire and the ocean that was even more violent than Mother Earth. The people of the Sand Nation who went there would soon turn into bones, and their fates would be even more miserable than those who had become slaves. After Echo awakened as an oracle, she was also known as a witch in the mainland kingdom. She had also thought of revenge, but her ability was useless in simulating voices. No matter how much she begged the 3 gods, the gods did not give her a decree. After living in the port of Clearwater for half a year, she came to understand that the gods' envoy was favored by the 3 gods, but it was just a lie that the Majins used to deceive themselves. Within the jurisdiction of the 4 kingdoms, the oracles were all targets of the church. From that day onwards, Huiyin had completely given up all hope of revenge. At this moment, thick smoke suddenly rose in the distance. She looked towards the east bank of the Redwater River, only to see a flickering green flame passing through the woods. The black smoke from the burning trees and the white mist from the evaporation of the snow mixed together, forming a gray column of smoke on the horizon. It was Anna's green flames. When they first arrived here, Vendi briefly introduced Anna and Nana to her sisters. At that time, Echo was very envious of Anna's ability. Freely manipulating flames, a high temperature that could melt swords. If she had such a strong power when she was in the Iron Sand City, no one in the Iron Whip clan would have survived. Echo shook her head. Now it was meaningless to think about these things. Compared to her clansmen who were likely to be buried in the yellow sand, she was still alive and lucky. Since His Royal Highness was willing to accept her, then all she could do was to work hard to complete His Royal Highness's orders. She cleared her throat and began to hum a song according to His Royal Highness's request. It was a cheerful song. His Royal Highness had only hummed it once, but she had completely remembered the whole tune. Music was no stranger to Echo. When she was taught as a superior slave, she had to master the skills of seductive dancing and provocative singing. But His Royal Highness's song was completely different. It was very rhythmic, full of a burst of vitality, especially when he asked her to imitate the sound of a flute to play this piece of music. Every note seemed to be beating, making people unable to help but want to dance with it. The difficulty was to add drums and strings while the song was progressing. It was the first time for Echo to simulate 3 kinds of sounds at the same time, and to overlap them. She had never thought that music could be played like this. At first, it was difficult for her to ensure that the drums would not disrupt the rhythm of the flute, so she tried to follow His Royal Highness's suggestion, using her hands or feet to beat the beat, gradually fusing the 2 kinds of sounds together. After a few days of practice, Echo gradually mastered this method of imitation. After trying it out a few times, she stood up and decided to add the last string music. As the music played, Echo found that the minor had changed again. If the cheerful flute formed its body, and the impassioned drums gave it its bones, then the string music at the end, which seemed to be embellished, gave the song a soul. She stepped on the beat, again and again, so that the 3 instruments completely merged into one. The sound became higher and higher, and finally she could not help but sing, "My attack power is higher than yours, so I won." Roland put the last card on the table, and Soroya, who was sitting opposite him, covered her face and suddenly made a low cry. One more game, she thought for a moment, and gathered the cards again. This time let me choose your 10 cards. Ahem, the prince coughed, it's getting late, I still have something to do, you go find someone else to play with. After making a roughly enough set of cards, the next step was copying. With the template in front of her, Soroya's drawing speed was comparable to a printer. Soon, Roland got a few copies of the same Gwent cards. So, Soroya became his first opponent. After the rules of the game were clearly explained, a card battle began. During the battle, he found that the witch's ability to accept was indeed higher than that of ordinary people. Soroya quickly figured out how to play cards. In the next few rounds, although Roland could still win, he had to use a special set of cards. Now, seeing the other party ask to draw cards for him, he shamefully refused. Okay, Soroya put the cards in her pocket and ran out of the door. At this moment, a cheerful and melodious music came from outside the window. She stopped in her tracks and ran back. She leaned against the window and peeked out. Is that Huiying? Well, it seems that she has completely mastered it. Roland sat back in his chair, enjoying the familiar music. The first army of Border Town would soon enter the comprehensive maneuver stage. Unlike standing on the wall and shooting, the comprehensive maneuver would be carried out in the wild, requiring the troops to keep orderly while marching. This was also the basic part of the lineup to be shot. In order to make the soldiers' footsteps consistent, they needed to rely on drums or slogans to direct everyone's pace. Now that he had a witch who could simulate mixed sounds, he simply learned from the British and directly used the infantry marching song. Compared to a simple drum, the marching song not only controlled the marching speed of the troops, but also effectively boosted the morale of the troops. Of course, the most famous marching song during the lineup to be shot was the March of the Grenadiers, but Roland only knew its name, he didn't remember the complete tune. But this wasn't a problem for him. There was a song that was based on the March of the Grenadiers, and it was widely spread throughout the country during the War of Resistance. And its melody was familiar to almost everyone. It was the famous guerrilla song. When Soroya turned her head, she heard the prince following the song, softly humming. It was a language she had never heard before. It was clean and neat, perfectly matching the rhythm of the song. We are all sharpshooters, every bullet destroys an enemy, we are all flying soldiers, even if the mountains are high and the rivers are deep. In the dense woods, everywhere we arrange our comrades' camps, on the high hills, with our countless brothers. Chapter 106. Scroll knocked on the door, and soon a response came from inside, please come in. She pushed the door open and entered. Anna was sitting at the table by the window, reading a thick book. The sunlight spilled in through the window, elongating the woman's shadow. Her soft cheeks and neck were dazzlingly white under the light, and the flaxen hair covering her shoulders was almost dyed pale gold. After getting along with her for almost a week, Scroll had basically figured out her temperament. For example, she was straightforward, never beat around the bush, calm and quiet, and especially eager to learn. In short, it was difficult to find a child born in a civilian family like Anna, who had a pure and peaceful heart. Aren't you going to play that card game? Scroll pulled a stool and sat next to Anna. In the past 2 days, the sisters would rush back to the castle after finishing their practice, and then crowded in Soroya's room to play the so-called Gwent card game, competing with each other for the others' cards, seemingly never getting tired of it. Even Nana Pine, who came to play with Anna every day, after learning how to play, rarely appeared less often. Unlike a few days ago, she could always see the little girl with the magical healing ability in the room. I want to read more books. Anna turned to the next page. I don't have your ability, so I can only spend more time on this. She read almost everything, from historical biographies to long poems, including all kinds of folk stories she had heard from the streets. As long as they were collected into a book, she would read them with relish. Scroll lovingly stroked her head. Don't worry, I'll tell you everything I remember. This is the child who changed the fate of the survivors of the Witch Cooperation Association, Scroll thought. If not for her, Nightingale would not have gone to Border Town halfway, would not have met the fourth Prince of Grey Castle, and would not have had all the subsequent events. In a sense, she was the savior of all witches. This was also the reason why Scroll had a good impression of Anna from the beginning, and the latter had quickly accepted her after seeing the Book of Magic, and expressed great envy, which made Scroll feel somewhat ridiculous. In the Witch Cooperation Association, no sister had ever envied her ability. On the other hand, Anna's magic capacity was the largest among all the witches Nightingale had ever seen, and her green flame was also very powerful. "Your hair is a little long," Scroll said, lifting up Anna's bangs that were about to cover her eyes. "Has no one ever cut your hair?" She shook her head. "I broke them myself." Scroll's interest was immediately piqued. "Twisted hair doesn't look good, let me help you trim it." "You know how to make this?" "In the Witch Cooperation Association, I cut most of the sisters' hair," Scroll chuckled. "Wait a moment, I'll go get the tools." She quickly returned with a cloth bag in her hand. Spreading out the layers of white cloth, there was a pair of bronze scissors. The scissors were V-shaped, and the handles on both ends were covered with tiny scratches. They emitted a glossy sheen, and it was obvious that they were often used. Before Scroll joined the Witch Cooperation Association, she relied on this pair of scissors to make a living in a tavern in Seawanshire. The copper royals she had saved up, in addition to buying bread, were given to an old captain with a broken leg. The captain taught her how to read and write until he died of old age. Scroll skillfully unfolded the white cloth, tied it around Anna's neck, and began to trim her long hair. "I have some questions I want to ask you." "What?" Scroll's fingers danced, and the scissors in her palm constantly opened and closed, issuing a crisp clicking sound. Her flaxen hair slipped through her fingertips and fell to the ground. "The book you showed me yesterday recorded many stories, and almost all of them have the same ending. Will the prince marry the princess?" Her hand paused for a moment. That storybook wasn't really a book, but a collection of folk stories she had heard the sailors sing during her 10 years in Seawanshire. It was just that Scroll had deliberately filtered the contents. She didn't want stories that didn't have a happy ending, or stories where the prince and the princess weren't together. Finally, they were put together into a book, and she made it out for Anna to read. She knew that the other side would definitely ask such a question after reading it, but when she really wanted to answer, she couldn't bear to do so. "Most of them are like this. Of course, some princes will marry the daughter of a Grand Duke or Duke. For example, King Wimbledon III of Greycastle, his wife is the daughter of the Silver Duke." After saying that, Scroll sighed in her heart. Vendi had mentioned to her about Nightingale's worries. Compared to the mature and calm Shadow Killer, she was more worried about Anna, who was getting closer to His Royal Highness. Anyone could see how important this woman was to His Royal Highness. When Anna was present, Roland's eyes always fell on her. She was several times busier than the other sisters. After Nightingale and Vendi's rooms were changed to be shared by 2 people, His Royal Highness only didn't adjust Anna's room. He also explained that when Anna spent the night in the castle, she could sleep in the same bed. He didn't realize that as the owner of this place, he didn't need to explain. Anna was the same. When she was with the other witches, she didn't talk much. Most of the time, she was just a quiet listener. Only when she was with Roland would she take the initiative. If there was anything that could make her eyes leave the book, Scroll bet that it would be His Royal Highness. Unfortunately, Roland was the 4th Prince of Greycastle Kingdom, the future king supported by the witches, while Anna was a witch. Scroll couldn't possibly remind His Royal Highness, so she had to come up with this method to beat around the bush with Anna. She didn't want the two to become estranged, and she didn't want to see a tragedy with no result. "Why?" Anna shook her head, seemingly trying to get rid of the hair on her neck. "What if the prince doesn't like the princess or the noble lady?" "Ah." Scroll didn't expect her to ask this. "Then he has to marry. Because the prince is likely to become the king, and the king's marriage isn't just his business." She tried to recall the relevant knowledge recorded in the book, in order to stabilize the great nobles at the border of the kingdom, to appease the restless neighboring countries, and even to reach a good deal. But the most important thing is that the king must have an heir. Anna didn't ask any more questions, which made Scroll feel a little relieved. This kind of thing could only be persuaded slowly. She believed that one day the other party would understand. After trimming her hair, Scroll smiled and scratched Anna's hair. "Not bad, you look a lot more spirited." "Thank you," Anna bowed her head. "So, today's book." Scroll thought for a moment and decided to summon the history of the Wolfshart Kingdom's royal family to strengthen the impression instilled in her today. "I'll choose a family biography." When she was ready to leave, Anna suddenly said while holding the Book of Illusions, "I don't think Roland is the prince in the story." Her voice was very sure. It didn't seem like she was trying to convince herself. He will only do what he wants to do, and nothing else matters. Scroll was startled. Why? Chapter 107. After dinner, Roland returned to his office and continued to copy the basic mathematical knowledge in his mind onto paper. He didn't have a photographic memory. Not only that, but his memory would also decline over time. Due to his profession, mathematics and physics were still frequently used subjects, but other knowledge such as history, geography, biology, chemistry, and so on, had probably regressed to an introductory level. Therefore, regardless of whether he used it or not, the earlier he wrote down the content he hadn't forgotten, the more knowledge he could retain. Every time he filled a piece of paper, he would let Scroll glance at it. As long as she looked at the content, it was equivalent to permanently preserving it. Unfortunately, Scroll's ability was only related to memory. It couldn't make her self-taught those high school mathematics knowledge. Therefore, when he had free time, Roland would explain it to her again. Of course, for a teacher like him, imparting knowledge was a very interesting thing. Especially when he saw Scroll's startled expression, or when she suddenly realized something after thinking hard, he felt a special sense of accomplishment in his heart. However, Roland knew that this also had something to do with the target of the teaching. Although Scroll was nearly 40 years old, her magic had greatly slowed down the aging of her face. The skin of her cheeks was still tight and rosy, and her long black hair was simply tied behind her head, making her look mature and capable. The fine wrinkles at the corner of her eyes didn't destroy the overall beauty, but instead served to accentuate her steady temperament. In a movie, she would definitely play the role of an elegant and versatile teacher. But now, he was able to make his teacher dumbfounded. This contrast was quite pleasing to the eye. While Roland was writing from memory, he was also thinking, what was the magic of this world? It was everywhere, whether it was the depths of the North Slope mine or the impassable mountain range, west to the barbarian land, east to Seawanshire, witches could use it to release all kinds of incredible power. If magic was regarded as electricity, then witches were electrical appliances with different functions. But obviously, it was much more incredible than electricity, more like a kind of energy close to the origin. For example, the Witch Cooperation Association's Kara, Vendi said that she could summon 4 kinds of magic snakes, called Death Sentence, Pain, Petrification, and Nothingness, each with different venom effects. Another example was Nightingale. Her mist almost distorted the space around her. The manifestations of these abilities were ever-changing. Apart from the word origin, Roland really couldn't think of any more appropriate words. If he had to give a definition to the origin, it would probably be a rule that was universal and universal. In the latter half of Einstein's life, he was determined to integrate the 4 fundamental forces of the universe into a theoretical framework, which was the so-called grand unification theory. In a sense, what he was doing was searching for the origin. Could there be a universal rule that could be used in any universe? At this point, Roland could not help but let his imagination run wild. Could it be that such a power also existed in his previous world, but there were no witches to release it, so it had been ignored by people? No matter what, Roland could only think about it. After all, with the current level of technology, he could not analyze this power at all. Therefore, promoting industrial development and promoting the progress of civilization was his main task. Perhaps one day, people would be able to directly use this power without the help of witches, a universal super energy that could be transformed into multiple effects at the same time. Just thinking about it made people excited. Your Royal Highness. Seeing the prince's intoxicated appearance, Scroll couldn't help but ask. Ahem. Roland recovered from his delusion, coughed twice, looked at the candle that was about to burn to the end, and said, "Let's stop here for today." Yes, she bowed her head and was about to leave when she unconsciously slowed down her pace. Roland didn't hear the sound of the door closing for a long time. Somewhat baffled, he raised his head and found that the other side was still at the door. "What's the matter?" "Your Royal Highness." Scroll hesitated for a moment. "I want to ask you a question." "Go ahead." Roland nodded, put down the quill in his hand, and raised the cup to drink some water. Everything about these witches was good, except for one thing: they were too lacking in self-confidence. They were like rabbits that poked their heads out of the hole, and when there was even the slightest movement, they would be scared and shrink back into the hole, never daring to come out again. He guessed that her question would be something along the lines of, "Why are you willing to take us in? Are you not afraid of the threat of the church?" and so on. Nightingale and Vendi had already asked him many times. But since the other side had put on such an attitude, he naturally had to answer them seriously, so that they could deeply feel that he should treat his comrades with the warmth of the spring breeze. Is it possible for you to marry a witch?" Pfft, Roland almost spat out the water in his mouth. Why do you ask this question?" Scroll opened her mouth, but couldn't answer. Marry a witch? The first thing that appeared in Roland's mind was Anna's figure. From the time he met her in the cage, her pair of lake blue eyes had left a deep impression in his heart. Witches were women who had awakened from ordinary human beings. Their abilities were outstanding, and from their appearance to their bodies, they were all superior to ordinary people. If they were in modern society, they would certainly be the focus of attention. So, what was there to hesitate about? Since that was the case, he looked at Scroll and replied with a smile, "Why not?" Vendi rubbed her sore shoulders and returned to her room. Her overly heavy chest always brought her a lot of trouble, especially when she was standing on the top of Little Town's wooden shed. She had to raise her hands slightly backward to maintain her body's balance. According to the results of the first trial, Little Town had made a number of improvements. For example, the place where she was standing had a simple shed, not only to shelter her from the wind and rain, but also to protect her from the sun. A ring of bark was hung around the hull to reduce the impact when docking. 2 short cement piles were installed on both sides of the ship to make it easier to fix the ship with hemp ropes. After nearly a month of training, her ability to control the wind had also greatly improved. Now the ship was more stable, and the speed could be fast or slow under the influence of the wind. She also learned to use the existing wind to adjust the magic consumption, so that she could persist for a longer time. Nightingale had finished her bath before Vendi, and was already sitting on the bed in her pajamas waiting for her. But to her surprise, the other side had an irrepressible smile on her face. Did something good happen? Vendi couldn't help but ask. The latter shook her head and didn't say anything, but the smile on her face deepened. Vendi's mouth twitched. After the last night's talk with her, her mood had been low, and it was only after the recent popularity of Gwent in the castle that her mood improved. Why was she suddenly smiling like a flower today? Where had that expressionless and taciturn shadow assassin whom he had first met in Silver City gone? Forget it. Vendi took off her clothes and stepped into the wooden bucket filled with hot water. She probably won a good card. To be continued. P.S. Chapter 108. 2 weeks had passed since the months of the demons, and the snow had turned into a stream that flowed into the Redwater River. After the white gauze had faded, the woods on both sides of the river had once again sprouted, and now it was full of green. The land on the east side of the town had been baked by Anna, and was temporarily used by His Highness as a training ground for the first army of Border Town. In the field, Carter Lannis held the bayonet sleeve and twisted it twice to check whether the bayonet was securely installed. This was a new invention invented by His Highness, but compared to the automatic operation of the black lump machine and the improved snow powder that could explode when ignited, this thing was too simple and crude. As soon as he held it in his hand, Carter knew that it was not a qualified weapon. In essence, it was nothing more than a sharp triangular piece of iron, with the centerline as the datum, slightly folded. Although it had a blade, it was impossible to use it to cut the target. After being bent, the two sides of the blade were extremely short, the front was almost non-existent, and the back was only as wide as a thumbnail. Even if it was an enemy without armor, it might not even be able to cut through their clothes. This weapon only had one use, and that was to stab, and it had to be connected to a gun before it could be used. Alone in the hand, it was even worse than a dagger. Wasting a lot of pig iron to create a weapon with only one attack method, in the eyes of the chief knight, it was naturally a substandard work. If there was a blacksmith in his territory who dared to do this, he would tie him up and beat him severely. But even with such a poor quality weapon, he could still see His Highness's originality in the details, such as the slot design of the sleeve, a groove with two right angles, as long as the small iron bar on the barrel was inserted, and then turned half a circle, the bayonet could be fixed on the barrel. This special shape of the groove made the sleeve and the barrel did not need to be very close to each other, and if the sleeve was too loose, some pieces of paper could be inserted and then rotated, if not, leaves could also be used. Put on the bayonet. Hearing the command, the members of the flintlock team who had been assigned a bayonet pulled out the blade from the bayonet bag strapped to their waist, and put on the barrel. The new weapon and the matching bayonet bag had been produced so far, and those who hadn't received it had to temporarily use a short wooden shaft as long as the gun. This set of movements had been practiced for almost the whole morning, and now most people only needed 2 to 3 breaths to fix the bayonet. According to His Highness, this was the last struggle, and he did not want to see his subordinates enter a hand-to-hand combat. Carter disagreed with this statement. If they didn't personally stab the enemy, they were still inexperienced. If they didn't personally stab the enemy, they wouldn't be able to. When Carter asked him to teach the soldiers how to practice assassination, he felt a little guilty. He had never heard of a bayonet before. What would he do if he didn't know how to use? When His Royal Highness had asked Carter to teach the soldiers how to assassinate, he had felt a little guilty. He had never heard of such a thing as a bayonet. What if he didn't know how to use it? However, after seeing the prototype, he immediately became full of confidence. This was equivalent to a shorter spear, and due to the special nature of the blade, it was much easier to use than a spear. The only advantage of the bayonet was that it was easy to train. There was no chopping, lifting, blocking, or sweeping. There was only one movement, stabbing. The chief knight made all the members line up in several rows, and taught them the most suitable stabbing movement, standing with both legs forward and backward, bending their knees, and pushing their arms forward with all their strength. This kind of repetitive training was extremely boring, but what made Carter amazed was that everyone was meticulously completing the stabbing movement. Before winter, they were still a group of weak and lazy civilians, but now they were performing very well. As soon as he shouted the command, they would immediately execute it. Training them was even more worry-free than training his subordinates. Of course, even if he gave them a sword, which was what His Highness called a cold weapon, these people would still not be able to last more than 3 moves. But in terms of willpower, their progress was worthy of him taking a look at them. After practicing for half an hour, Carter let the flintlock team sit down and take a short break. At this time, His Royal Highness also appeared in the practice field, and he was accompanied by a hooded woman. The knight was not surprised. His Royal Highness had already told him in advance that today's practice would be carried out with the help of a witch. However, the witch was really tall. At first glance she was almost as tall as His Royal Highness. Girls should be small, Carter thought. Then he let everyone stand up and salute His Royal Highness the 4th Prince. Your Royal Highness. The soldiers raised their hands to their foreheads and shouted. You've worked hard, Roland nodded and walked over to the knight's side. Just as he was about to speak, a big man suddenly rushed out of the team. Carter Lannis frowned and took a step in front of the prince, his hand already on the hilt of his sword. Nightingale was the first to appear, grabbing Roland's arm. As long as the situation was slightly wrong, she could pull the prince into the fog. The big man who rushed out was Iron Axe. He didn't run to the prince, but instead knelt down in front of the woman. He didn't kneel on one knee like the mainland kingdom, but rather his whole body on the ground, his head deeply buried between his arms. Chief. The Flintlock team's training was forced to stop. Tell me, what's going on here? In the castle hall, Carter, Echo and Iron Axe stood in a row, while Roland sat in the main seat and asked with slight dissatisfaction. Discipline, discipline. How many times have I emphasized that the army should have iron discipline? Not to mention the chief, even if they saw the king, they shouldn't be moved. If they really have a request, they can report it. He couldn't help but sigh at the thought of Iron Axe's future. In the end, his cultural quality is not up to speed, and he can't thoroughly understand the meaning of discipline. Your Royal Highness, Iron Axe couldn't help but want to kneel, but before he could, he was stopped by Roland. Stand and speak. Yes, Echo swallowed and said, Lady Silvermoon is the clan chief I served in Iron Sand City. No, Cabago, I'm not the chief. Echo hurriedly said. No, you are, Iron Axe retorted, after the death of your father and brother, according to Majin custom, from that moment on, you are the chief of the Osha clan. I heard that you were sold to the port of Clearwater, but I didn't find you there, I thought you were dead. But Roland interrupted Echo, one by one, Iron Axe, you go first. Yes, your Royal Highness. This story was not complicated, Roland soon understood the general course of events. Echo was originally a member of the Osha clan in Iron Sand City, her real name was Drow Silvermoon, and her father was the chief of the Osha clan. Chapter 109. However, the Osha clan was defeated in a duel by the Iron Whip clan, who used insidious means behind their back. Not only that, but the clan leader was also killed, and the clan was exiled to the Endless Cape. As the daughter of the clan leader, Drow Silvermoon, also known as Echo, because of her outstanding appearance, was sold as a superior slave to the slave merchants of the port of Clearwater. Iron Axe, because of his mixed blood status, although he was adopted by the Osha clan, he was not regarded as a real Majin by the Sand people, so he was not sentenced to exile. Instead, because of his excellent martial skills, he was fancied by other clans, who wanted to recruit him. Iron Axe was grateful to the clan leader for taking care of him for many years, plus he wanted to save Echo, so he did not hesitate to refuse the other clans. After a long and arduous journey, he finally arrived at the port of Clearwater, but he did not know that at this time Echo had already been sold to Grey Castle. Later, one was rescued by a witch and became a member of the Witch Cooperation Association, while the other was disheartened and went to the western region of Grey Castle. Until today, the two of them unexpectedly met again in Border Town. What are you going to do? Roland pondered for a moment. Will you return to the southernmost region with Echo and revive the Osha clan? No, Your Highness. Iron Axe knelt on one knee. I have sworn to the three gods that I will serve you for the rest of my life. When I saw Lady Silvermoon, I was too excited and couldn't control my emotions, please punish me. What about you? The prince looked at Echo, do you want to avenge your clansman? Echo also knelt down and said, I once thought of revenge when I awakened as a witch, but now I no longer have such thoughts. She bit her lip and said, please let me stay here. I have nowhere else to go. I understand, stand up, Roland said calmly, you don't have to be like this, I haven't said anything yet. He paused for a moment, then changed the topic, in fact, it's not impossible to help you get revenge. What? Iron Axe's eyes widened, he couldn't believe his ears. Echo didn't have much of a reaction, it was obvious that she didn't have any hope of returning to Iron Sand City. Of course not now. Roland waved his hand. This was not a whim, but something very interesting from Iron Axe's description of the southernmost region. The land there was extremely hot and dry, and the environment was very strange. In particular, the orange flames that erupted from underground could burn for decades without being extinguished. Near the orange fire, one could often see a huge gap in the ground. At the bottom of the fault, the Black Nether River flowed ceaselessly. Be it orange fire or Styx River, Roland felt that they were just petroleum. And it was oil flowing in the open. There was no need to mention how important this black liquid was to the industry. Half of modern wars were caused by it. The rise and fall of oil prices could affect the rise and fall of a number of countries, and could even change the structure of the world. If he could intervene in the southernmost region with the help of the Osha clan, maybe he could get a stable source of oil. However, Roland did not have the time to care about the dispute in the remote area. He could only leave a prelude and put on a show of, since ancient times, later. After I ascend the throne, I will consider seeking justice for you. Roland stopped Iron Axe, who wanted to kneel down again. But today, your behavior violated the discipline of the First Army. You will be confined for 2 days. Reflect on yourself. Yes, Your Highness, Iron Axe replied excitedly. Then continue the training, Roland said to Chief Knight Carter. You will also be responsible for the following marching. Carter nodded in agreement. Brian thought that today's training would end, but everyone was still sitting in the training field, and no one left alone. Because before Carter left with the prince, he had ordered them to rest on the spot instead of dispersing. If it was the patrol team he had been in before, such a scene was simply unimaginable. Sir Knight, do you think Sir Iron Axe will come again? Nail, who was in the same group as Brian, came up and asked. His behavior just now really scared me. How many times have I told you, don't call me sir, Brian corrected. In the First Army, you should call me Captain. His Highness said that we should address each other by military rank. After being conferred the title of Knight by Prince Roland, his status in the team suddenly rose, and no one dared to talk to him. Only Nail, who had been transferred from the mine to the army, often came up to chat with him. According to Nail, not to mention the knight, he had even had a close conversation with His Highness Roland himself. This kind of thing. His Highness won't blame him too much, will he? Although he said so, Brian was still not sure. He had seen the tragedy of a civilian accidentally colliding with the former lord's carriage and being stabbed to death by the guards on the spot. Iron Axe was a foreigner, and in front of the prince, he knelt down to a woman and called her chief, which could be regarded as a breach of etiquette. I guess so, Nail nodded repeatedly. I also personally talked to His Highness. He and those nobles, He scratched his head, as if thinking about how to express himself. They look similar, but they feel completely different. Brian also didn't want anything to happen to Iron Axe. After more than a month of group training, he already greatly admired this foreigner. Especially when he taught everyone how to set up tents during field training, his superb skills and tireless teaching had benefited everyone a lot. In the eyes of the knight, Iron Axe was even more suitable to be the commander of the First Army than Carter Lannis. They're coming. Nail pushed Brian's arm. Hey, I don't seem to see Sir Iron Axe. Before he could let his imagination run wild, Carter had already ordered everyone to line up according to the previously assigned groups. Then His Highness Roland stepped forward and said, this woman beside me is a witch called Echo, and she is also Iron Axe's long-lost relative. Iron Axe has been sentenced to 2 days of confinement according to the regulations for disrupting the formation and violating the military discipline. I repeat, you are a regular army, and the most important thing for a soldier is to obey orders and observe discipline. Do you understand? Yes. Your Highness. Brian shouted together with the others. Hearing the result of Iron Axe's handling, he let out a sigh of relief. Nail, who was standing beside him, secretly made a face at him. In the following training, Echo will assist you. Her ability is to simulate all kinds of sounds, including musical instruments, horns and drums. The marching song she's going to play will be the order for you to move. Everyone will move according to the drumbeat and try to keep the team in the same line. At this point, His Highness paused. On the battlefield, Echo will stand behind you. She is the flag of the First Army and the soul of the Flintlock team. You must do everything possible to protect her. So, everyone should first familiarize yourself with the tune. What is a marching song? Brian listened with a confused face. Is it the kind of music that people occasionally sing in pubs? Is that kind of soft music suitable to command everyone to move forward? But when the melody that he had never heard before came from Echo's mouth, he almost instantly understood what His Highness meant. The rhythmic drumbeat made him want to move forward, and the light melody aroused his desire to fight. The so-called marching song was the war song that inspired people on the battlefield and encouraged everyone to keep moving forward. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.